Okay, a very good morning, everybody, and welcome to the second day of the 2024 International Forum on Taiwan Cultural Heritage. 非常欢迎各位贵宾呢继续回到我们2024台湾文化遗产国际论坛的第二天的大会哦。And now for session 4. Our speakers are going to take you on a deep dive into regulatory responsibilities and empowerment. 那接下来呢，我们今天一开始的场次4，我们要聚焦的是规约的责能以及赋能。首先呢，我们掌声欢迎我们场次的主持人，中国科技大学建筑系的严雅宁教授。Please welcome your moderator, Professor Yaning Yan, Department of Architecture, China University of Technology. 老师有请。
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It is my tremendous honor to be the moderator for the 4th session of the conference. Once again, good morning and warm welcome to all of you. We have 3 speakers and 1 moderator who will be attending this specific session. The 3 speakers are as follows. Professor Kono, Honorary President of ICOMOS. Professor Kono is currently Professor Emeritus at Kyushu University. He specializes in International Relations Act, Cultural Heritage Preservation Act. He was the former president of ICOMOS. However, his term coincided with the world pandemic. Nonetheless, he was able to contribute a great deal to the advancement of the ICOMOS affairs. The ICOMOS University Forum, akin to Taiwan's USR, was created thanks to him. It is a communication and world exchange platform, particularly for youth. So under that specific project, many other youth participation programs, such as EP, Emerging Professionals programs, were created, and they're now being promoted actively across different regions of the world. So we would like to thank Professor Kono for his tremendous contribution. The topic of his presentation today is the relationships between UNESCO heritage conventions and national legislation, some cases in Japan. Next, please welcome Ms. Huang, representing Taiwan. She is a postdoctoral candidate at the design program at Chongyuan Christian University. She will talk about policies and methods for Japan's modernization industrial heritage as a continuation of yesterday's discussion. Mr. Liu is our 3rd speaker. He's not only a professor at the Graduate School of Culture and Education Law at the National Taipei University of Education. He also sits on the board of the consultancy as well as advisory board for a number of cultural heritage evaluation committees in Taiwan. Without further ado, I would like to turn the program over to Professor Kono.
Just click it. Good morning, 你好. Thank you very much, Alex, for your very kind introduction. My name is Toshiyuki Kono from, well, I retired technically last year from Kyushu University, but somehow I'm still affiliated with through some research projects, and I really enjoy being a member of e-commerce, especially after the very long pandemic period. Being connected with so many friends all over the world is really a big thing for me. So I'm very much very happy to be here, and I would like to thank you and the organizers for inviting me. My talk today is the relationship between UNESCO conventions and the national legislation. When I introduced myself at the meetings in the field of heritage as a lawyer, and many people ask, "You're a lawyer, why are you here?" So the law is not directly related to heritage preservation for many people. However, the law and regulations create framework, and this framework sustains the preservation system. In a better way or in not so good way, it depends on the case. So today I try to illustrate what Japan has experienced so far in relation to two UNESCO conventions. One is 2003 Intangible Cultural Heritage Convention and the 1972 World Heritage Convention. So let me start with intangible cultural heritage. Well, Japan promulgated a law for the protection of cultural property in 1950. There were laws to protect buildings or sites even before 1950, but in 1950, the government put all existing laws together and compiled and then created a new law. Many aspects or many rules are transferred from the previous laws, but the very first thing that this law introduced was the protection of intangible cultural property. So legal term in Japanese law is this intangible cultural property. It doesn't say intangible cultural heritage. So when I say intangible cultural heritage, please understand me as I'm referring to a very general concept. And if I say intangible cultural property, it is a very legal term used in the Japanese law. So this is the very first legislation in the world which stipulates the protection of intangible cultural heritage. What kind of heritage? I will go into details shortly after. The background of it is that the societal changes, drastic societal changes after the World War II. So American American way of living arrived in Japan, and then the Japanese people started to change their lives very, very quickly and dramatically. And some intellectuals started to worry about the future of traditional activities, especially traditional performing arts and crafts. They might be lost very quickly. So exceptionally, the Diet members drafted this law, and then it passed the parliament sessions. So since the Diet members drafted this law, the language is a little bit, from purely legal point of view, a little bit blur, and not so clearly articulated. But this is, I think, they made the law very, very quickly. in the drafting process, when I went through the debates in the drafting process, and then at the very beginning, the lawmakers wanted to protect intangible cultural property in danger. But then in the process of the debates, they decided to take the in danger out from the law, so that instead of focusing on very, let's say, fragile, weak traditional activities, the law enabled to support traditional performing arts, for instance, even it is in a good shape. In a good shape means that many people love it and many people practice it. So this removal actually, the deletion, the language in danger actually made a lot of sense. Well, the protection scheme is as follows. It is based on a valuation system. So it means that the Japanese law has a starting point that this art of performing arts is more important or higher value than others. So it's a valued system. And the first thing is that the designation of important intangible cultural property. So I put on a picture of a bunraku. This is the traditional puppet theater, which has a 400-year history as an important art form. I wonder if I could, let me try to play. So it has a longer history in the Kabuki theater, and the one puppet is. Oh, sorry.
来帮我们秀一下那个影片，谢谢。
It is working now. So this has a 400-year history, and the one puppet is manipulated by 3 puppeteers, and the 1 storyteller, and the 1 instrument player. And so this is a minimum unit. And this 1 storyteller uses different color of voices so that he describes different personalities. But the puppeteer, you need 3 puppeteers all the time. So it's an ensemble theater in a sense. So the main puppeteer uses the head and the right arm, and his assistant uses the left arm, and the 3rd assistant uses the legs or feet. So this needs to be very well coordinated, and they say that it takes at least 9 years to be one of the assistants. So the main puppeteers actually has more than 25-year experiences behind him. Well, maybe I should skip some part of it. So this also there is a National Bunraku Theater in Osaka. So if you have an opportunity to visit Osaka, then try to visit this theater. And they have also the repair section and the maintenance section as well.
帯だってこれだから3つに分かれてってね組み合わせて作ってるからできるんで、1本の帯を結べなんて言ったら
This art form is designated as important cultural property, and you need a group of people, and this group is certified as a holder of intangible cultural property.
左手で人形の頭を動かし、右手で人形の右手を動かします。ずっしりと人形の重みを感じます。
立ち上がるとこうグッと
So the female puppets don't show the feet. So the feet is expressed with the hands of the
私が
puppeteer.
挑戦したのは重使いというポジション。
So this main puppeteer gives an
指示を
instruction
出しながら操る本来ベテランが演じる難しい役割です。こんにちは。
もうちょっとグッと下げるグッと下げるもっと下げる
deeper, 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 he
そうで
says.
す。
でも本当
見えないんですけれども、その演技の中にこの合図がまあ隠されてるわけですよね。
息づいています。
Stop here. Can you go back? There are many YouTube videos on Bunraku Theatre, so if you're interested, please look at the visitors of these YouTube.
よく使いますね。
Well, so this is just an example of traditional art form, which started in 400 years ago. So the protection scheme is designate specific art form like Bunraku puppet theater, and then certify individual performers or group of performers as a holder of intangible cultural heritage. So this is the very basic scheme. Then what is the criteria of designation? This is the regulation by the Japanese authority, and when we may look at closely, it says that items as performing art, such as music, dance, theater, and others, which have especially high artistic value, or especially important status in the history of performing arts, or high artistic value or important status in the history of performing arts and distinctive character of a region or of a school, and especially excellent skills. So this is very high value plus very excellent skills. So these are the two important criteria for designation and certification. And the picture here is the Kumiodori in Okinawa, very southern part of Japan. This art form was created in the 18th century to entertain the envoy from China. At that time, Okinawa was in a kingdom, Ryukyu kingdom, and then they have a very close relationship with China at the same time. Well, criteria of certification is a high level, in the domain of performing arts, individuals who on a high level embody and represent a performing art or techniques of performing arts. Individuals or members of the group. So this high skills is an important aspect of this certification. The similar structure or similar scheme is applied to craft as well. Items as craft such as ceramic, porcelain, textile, and dyeing, lacquerware, this is lacquerware, metalwork, and others which have especially high artistic value, especially important status in the history of craft, or high artistic value or important status in the history of craft and distinctive character of a region. Again, the criteria of certification, the similar approach. Individuals or groups, and individuals on high-level realized skills and techniques of craft, or members who, 2 or more persons of the unit, on a high-level realized skills and techniques. So this group, the members of the group as a holder of intangible cultural property is typically for, let's say, ceramic production, where the work is divided among different people, or lacquerware. So you need a collective work of a group. So this is the members of the group. So to sum up, as I said, the core factors of Japanese legal scheme to protect intangible cultural property is the high value and excellent skills. This picture, for instance, this is a kimono maker. He's making a kimono. He's a very famous person. He's making a kimono. And you see a small dot in the picture. It looks like a poppy seed, but it is not a poppy seed, it's a glue. He has a skill to make a very, very small piece of glue, and the yellow part is glued as well. So the white part is the original color of silk fabric. He put the glue, and then again he put all these small dots, and what he's doing is that not to accumulate the small pieces of glue, so he distributes in a smaller piece. And what happens is that after this process, he dye fabric so that the glued part remain white or uncolored. So the small dot actually by creating small piece of glue and distributed evenly, manually. This is a process of kimono making. And this implies that this person has an extremely high level of skills. And of course, this is very original skills. But then we have 2 questions. I presented performing arts and crafts. What happens when the other field, for instance, cooking or brewing, what happens with that? This is completely excluded from the scope of the law at that time. And what about the rituals and customs practiced in families? This was also excluded from the scope of the law at that time. So that was 1950. 25 years later, things started to move. The new category of intangible cultural heritage was added to this legal scheme. The first thing is that important intangible folk cultural property. So the previous ones were actually outcome or performances or the works of professionals with high skills, but this one is by communities, local residents. That's why these the festivals, seasonal festivals, were chosen and then designated as important intangible whole cultural property. The picture on the right-hand side, this is the very famous Gion Festival in Kyoto. And on the picture on the left-hand side, this is Hakata Yamagasa in Fukuoka City. Takes place almost the same time of the year, in mid-July. Both have a similar religious origin, but the way of presenting the rituals is very, very different. For instance, let me explain a little bit more about that. Social manners and customs. As I said that after the World War II, the society has changed a lot in Japan. And then in 60s and 70s, this was actually the period where enormous economic development was achieved. So it led to modernizing the lifestyles tremendously, very quickly. So many people started abandon traditional manners and customs. And also the demographic changes, i.e., in some rituals only boys can play, but the number of boys started to decrease, for instance. So in this case, they have to adapt their traditions to the reality. So due to these changes, the government decided to add this intangible folk cultural property as a new category to protect. How to protect? The structure is, again, similar. Again, this is based on a value system. The items that typically show characteristics of the basic life culture of Japanese nationals from its origins, and items show the basis of performing arts carried out in annual events, rituals, religious ceremony, etc. So again, the valuation system, the authorities select and designate some items through the lens of importance, and again, certificate holders. Then who holds? In a previous case, the crafts and performing arts, the individual professional performers or craftsmen can be selected and certified. But in the case of residents, the number of residents changes. Some people may move out, some people may move in. So it's very difficult to identify who the bearers could be. So the government approach is to request the residents create an association for preserving these traditional festivals or customs. So the association representing the residents is the counterpart of the authority. Second item added is so-called traditional preservation technique. Yesterday, before this forum started, a very interesting film was shown on the screen, and then I was following the description, and I could get the sense that there's a similar system also in Taiwan. And this is very important because in order to preserve buildings, you need traditional techniques, and you need traditional materials as well. And if you lose techniques or materials, then you cannot implement the traditional conservation method to the building. So this is intangible, but this is crucial for tangible. And so this category was created, and there are 13 kinds of techniques right now. And on the left-hand side, you see the conservation technique for wood, and the others is repair, especially for Buddha figures, Buddha images. And both are, by the way, inscribed on the representative list of UNESCO Convention. So this was 1975. Then the convention came in 2003. I was one of the negotiators of this convention, which started 2001 and concluded in 2003. And I went to Paris maybe 5 times a year and spent more than 60 days. That was the most intensive experience that I have ever in my life. It started in UNESCO, nothing is punctual, so you started about 10-ish in the morning, and then ends, let's say, midnight, almost midnight. And sometimes there were some negotiations ongoing during the lunch break, or even a coffee break, or informal sessions, and so on and so on. I still remember when I attended I was invited as an expert meeting, to an expert meeting. Let's say 8 experts were invited to prepare experts draft. That was very smooth. It was very smooth. But at the first intergovernmental session, I still remember that was I was standing in the middle of a storm. The argument to make this convention is that intangible cultural heritage is in danger, therefore we need an urgent action. Let's make this convention. I remember that an ambassador from, I think that was a Belgian ambassador, he said, if intangible cultural heritage is in danger, let it die out. That was a very strong message, but was a majority opinions at that time. So it was remarkable to see that after 20 years, more than 150 countries ratified this convention. That was a drastic change. I pointed out some specificities of the convention. First, there is no universal value of intangible cultural heritage. Therefore, the convention doesn't say world intangible cultural heritage, it says intangible cultural heritage, not world. Okay, so this is the big difference between World Heritage Convention and Intangible Cultural Heritage Convention. The second, there's no valuation system. Okay, so the festival in country A and the festival in country B, which is more important, which has more value, they don't discuss about that. They hate this kind of discussion. So all intangible cultural heritage have the same value. So originally, experts draft was used the language masterpiece, the list of masterpiece of intangible cultural heritage. So the masterpiece, the language masterpiece was so hated at the Intergovernmental Committee, so it was eliminated completely. And third, there's no need to demonstrate skills. Anybody could be bearer of traditions. So skills, professional skills are not indispensable, okay? And community-based, not an individual performer, but should be a community, okay? The third point, bearers, very wide scope of bearers. Well, these are the recent example of safeguarded intangible cultural heritage by the convention. On the left-hand side, this is the baguette, okay? Okay, so this is, the bearer is actually the bakers, French bakers. On your right-hand side, this is Berlin techno. Who is the bearer? Millions of young people go to Berlin and they dance with the techno music over weekends. Who is the bearer? Organizer? Participants, etc., etc. But these are already safeguarded in the Intangible Cultural Heritage Convention. So it is a very different approach. You can see very different approach from Japanese approach. Recently, Japan added a new category of protection scheme, i.e. registration. So this is different from designation as a top-down, but is rather bottom-up. So the municipality recommends, and then it is registered. It's bottom-up approach and a very moderate protection, and very close to daily lives, like calligraphy or soy sauce making in a specific municipality. So still, however, it is necessary to identify who the bearers are, and they have to have skills. So from a Japanese national legislation point of view, it is consistent, okay? So the value system is not here so strong. But who bears, and this person must have skills. This has been, let's say, basso continuo of this skill. Then, two irritations in Japan related to 2003 conventions. One, individual performers cannot be, or have not been yet nominated for inscription in the representative list. Only the community-based ones, because the convention doesn't appreciate the individual performers. Second, the sauna culture in Finland is inscribed as intangible cultural heritage. But since Japanese authority requires skills and bearers, onsen, hot spa culture in Japan is not yet inscribed. So the onsen, the communities are very much frustrated because this is not required by the convention, but required by the Japanese authority. So this is maybe the two irritations caused by one's from the convention side, the other from the Japanese legislation side. Well, I have not much left, so 3 minutes. Time's up. Give me 3 minutes. So, World Heritage Convention. Japan ratified in 1992, and later, shortly after, Horyoji Temple and the Himeji-jo were inscribed as World Heritage. And then the temples and gardens in Kyoto in the following year. But there was a big concern about the traditional conservation practices. This is the way of conservation means dismantling the traditional buildings, keep the original wood, replace the rotted part with a new wood, and reassemble together. So that through this practice, the buildings get a new life for another 200 years. And it has been practiced over centuries. But this has been critically seen, especially by Europeans, from the viewpoint of authenticity. So the government organized a conference and adopted the Nara document on authenticity. This has not convention, this has no legal meaning, just a document drafted by experts and adopted by experts, but it has a universally important role at the moment. And recognition of diversity in the conservation method, credibility of information, and more factors can be introduced, taken into consideration. This is the part of the Nara document, but I've skipped this one. And it has incorporated in the operational guidelines so that it's a part of World Heritage Convention. So it started with a very, very soft document, but is now a part of the convention. Since then, Japan contributed, and every 10 years, a different aspect on the debate of authenticity. And I was deeply involved in 2014 initiative, Nara Plus 20, and I'm involved with this convention, the conference. If you have time, please come to participate in this conference. It takes place January 10th and 11th next year. It is about ecosystem of a heritage ecosystem. It is a quite new approach to authenticity. And the venue is, by the way, also a 20th century architecture. So I have to skip now. The new category was added to the Japanese legislation under the influence of World Heritage Convention. This is important cultural landscape. The scope is narrower because the garden is already under the scheme of different protection system. But this village is very unique because this village does not change its form and the way of life, or maybe way of life is a bit strong. The structure of this village does not change since, let's say, 12th century. It is probably the only one in Japan. Maybe, I don't know how many still exist, this kind of village in the world. So, but this is not yet the World Heritage item, but this is it is selected as important cultural landscape. But the weakness of Japanese law is that the buffer zone. Area-based protection is very weak. So always, when you do nominate something as to a World Heritage Convention, how to secure the buffer zone is always a problem. And this is a Yoyogi gymnasium, which may be nominated in the near future, but this is located in Shibuya. It is one of the busiest areas in Tokyo. So how to preserve the buffer zone is a big problem. So I skip this part. Please read it, or if you have questions, I'm more than happy to answer during the panel discussion. But thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much to Professor Toshiyuki Kono for your talk. Thank you. 非常谢谢河野俊行教授精彩的分享。And next to talk about some of Japan's policies and methods to promote modern industrial heritage, please welcome your next speaker, Yu Huang, postdoctoral candidate and researcher of design program at Zhongyuan Christian University. 接下来呢，我们就有请黄老师，黄玉研究员。来分享日本近代产业遗产的推动策略以及机制。掌声欢迎 ，Please welcome her.
Good morning. First of all, I would like to thank the Ministry of Culture, the host organization, for the invitation. I am Huang Yuyun. I work at the Zhongyuan University Cultural Heritage Preservation Research Center. My mentor is Professor Huang Junmin. We've conducted this research together. And here, I would also like to greet Professor Kono. I'd like to also thank the host for introducing me. So for today's presentation, we've also got to discuss some of the content yesterday. So here I would follow what Professor Kono had talked about. Here I'm focusing on modernization heritage. Some scholars in Taiwan they have different ideas about this term. We use modern, modernization, or modernity. There are different terms used. But here, we see in Japan, they say modernization, industrial heritage, and then some Western countries will say modernity. So the different terms that we use, it depends on the interpreter, depends on one's understanding. Today, I'm going to talk about the situation in Japan, but I'm also going to take a broader perspective from East Asia and also a broader global perspective. This session focuses on legal frameworks and regulations that are related to cultural heritage. I know many of you come from different disciplines. You have different insights, and I really hope that my sharing today can serve as a basis for our further discussion. In 1973, Tiki was launched. There were more and more people who attached importance to industrial heritage. And then in 1984, the Iron Bridge Valley in the UK was registered as a World Heritage Site. For ICOMOS and for UNESCO, related to industrial heritage, we have seen more progress made. So under Tiki at that time, there was a very important 2003 Tajil Charter for Industrial Heritage. According to this charter, there must be a more systematic approach in preserving industrial heritage. And then in early 2000, Taiwan joined the WTO. Many industries in Taiwan faced huge competition globally. A lot of the state-owned enterprises went through merger and acquisitions. We saw a lot of industries facing huge impacts. There were more discussions at that time about industrial heritage preservation. So in 2012, Tiki held its annual assembly in Taipei, and we had the Taipei Declaration for Asian Industrial Heritage. You look at the entire timeline for Taiwan, we've worked for at least a decade. And here we hold that the history of industrial development differs country by country, and the preservation of industrial heritage needs to take a system-wide approach. So here, looking at the historical background here in Taiwan, we look at Japan's modernization process timeline. It started from the Edo shogunate period, from around 1603 all the way. You see these different periods, developments, and in the different developments and periods, there were a lot of different reflections on modernization, industrial heritage. As for Taiwan, we are also discussing what are the periods of modernization in Taiwan. We've introduced technologies from Japan, from the West. Taiwan was ruled by Japan. And then before Japan's ruling period, there was also, during the Qing dynasty, introduction of Western technologies. So how do you review the timeline of Taiwan's modernization? You might even trace back further to the Dutch period, for example. So Qing dynasty, Japanese ruling period, all the way till 1945 when the nationalist KMT government came to Taiwan. Here we see the different policies in purple, for example. Those are different government policies. For example, the 10 or the 14th major national infrastructure programs. Even now, we still have programs that introduce advanced technologies. So these are all closely tied to global developments. Last year, I conducted a study on Korea. Here, I've also included the diagram of the modern history of Korea. This is still an ongoing process. Here, you can look at the starting point for Japan and Korea. It both started around 1850. So 1850 as a very important starting point of westernization, of modernization. Looking at this historical context, for example, we talked about the concept of industrial monuments and then industrial archaeology. Some of you might not be that familiar with, but in the UK, they took an industrial archaeology approach to understand the remaining structures. A lot of these research take an archaeological approach and method in discussing the industrialization process. And then we talked about the Tajil Charter. Since the Tajil Charter, we talk more about industrial heritage from the beginning, from the manufacturing process to the final products to the impact on people's daily life. We look at the entire spectrum, talking about industrial heritage, and that was a very clear definition concept in the Tajil chapter. Another aspect is the Japan modernization heritage. A lot of people wonder, why don't you say modern heritage and you say modernization heritage? This is actually a term influenced by the Japanese term. It's talking about this process, this evolution in history, about the country modernizing from the end of the Edo shogunate period to the Second World War. This is about the main timeline. Of course, there are some ambiguities, but this is the main timeline when we talk about Japan's modernization heritage. So as you can see, these are very huge scope of research. According to Japan's MITI, they also have researched and studied the so-called clusters of Japanese modernization industrial heritage. For Korea, they talk about modern cultural heritage. From last year to this year, Korea's law went through major revisions, and we are all following closely what's happening in Korea. And also, we are seeing a lot of these concepts and practices converging. So here, the mechanism of Japan's modernization heritage. It started from scholarly research societies, for example, Modern Civil Engineering Society at that time, back in 1990s. And then in Hokkaido, there is a water canal preservation movement in Otaru. And there are also different preservation movements taking place in Japan. So in 1993, Japan initiated a modern civil engineer heritage nationwide survey. This is a nationwide survey, and throughout the survey, different scholars took part around 1993. And 1993 onward, the Japanese government started to realize that they must amend the law to make sure that everything stays updated. So from industrial heritage to world heritage, and very often Japan, you talk about the Japanese heritage. These are all ongoing efforts and policies. Professor Kono also mentioned that in the Japanese heritage, in the series of Japanese heritage, there's a very comprehensive approach. So here, I will just briefly go through these points. As mentioned, from 1990 to 2013, around 10 years, Japan invested a lot of resources in conducting the comprehensive survey on modernization heritage. And here, the so-called modernization heritage, in addition to the timeline that I just mentioned from Edo, the end of Edo shogunate period to Second World War, it has also identified a number of industries, manufacturing or forestry or the third tertiary sector, public service. The Japanese government also reviewed these different industries in the nationwide survey. It's modernization movement that has had such an impact in all aspects of people's life: public policies, education, financial services, government sectors, and even like transportation. Everything has an effect on people's lives. And also, these different industries saw a lot of changes over time as well. It's really a huge inventory. And then they also looked at these properties by geographic regions. Modernization or modern heritage compared to the historical heritage, for example. For the historical houses and the modernization houses, they're very different. So the preservation concerns, the repair skills, technologies required are also different. That's the same in Taiwan. We talk about the historical temples and then the more modern public infrastructures. These different buildings, structures from different time periods all have different requirements. So here you can see the different classification in terms of time. Pre-modern times to modern region, using 1850 as like a cutting point. But again, it is not a very clear-cut time point. It is still reviewed on a case-by-case basis. So here you see on the cultural property classification, there are shrines, there are also temples, there are education activities in the modern times. You look at the different names and it reflects the function, the usage of these different properties. I've also made this comparison table looking into the Taiwanese Cultural Heritage Preservation Act. The names of the registered heritage If it's a dormitory, they will say it's a house. A lot of these names are very ambiguous, very confusing. And this is something that we have been discussing. Here in Taiwan, when we talk about modernization period, we talk about the subjectivity of our modernization. We should try to survey and review all the different modernization properties and then define the proper names and classifications and also make necessary legal amendments. This was the same case in Japan. For example, in Japan, they have a natural monument standard. It's a very early standard. Japan also has a similar standard. And then for the national treasures, for important cultural properties, there are all these designated standards. And here you see a comparison between the old former standards and the new standards in 1995. Here, after this overhaul, you see a lot of major changes. Take historical buildings, for example. The definition is rather lenient. It's a 50 years. If the building has a 50-year history, it can be regarded as a historical building. I talked about MITI, about Ministry of Economy in Japan. It talks about the different industries, mining industry, energy, heavy, light industry. So these are the 33 sites that were registered in Japan's list of Modernization Industrial Heritage Group. And you see these huge clusters of heritage sites. They cover tangible, intangible heritage in different parts of Japan. And here, for World Heritage, this all started from 1993. This is based on the survey data that we have all collected. And then for the World Heritage of the Meiji period, that's also the same idea. And then for the restoration regulations, there are very clear guidelines how to preserve and management the modernization heritage, how to utilize them. There are very clear guidelines for this. And here, this is related. This is like a very new idea in looking at modernization heritage. There are also a lot of research societies that are playing a very important role. And here, this is the Tokyo National Research Institute for Cultural Properties. We see a lot of mutual exchange. For example, this is a visit in Taipei at the Taipei Locomotive Factory Railway Museum. We've also visited Japan, visited their shipbuilding plants. And here I would also like to share with you this very important institutional semi-government organization, Zenkin, All Japan Liaison Council for the Utilization of the Heritage of Modernization. Once you become a Zenkin member, you can have access to all kinds of professional information. And also, there's a lot of information about restoring and the different ways and the expertise in restoring modernization heritage. In Japan, a lot of these facilities are privately owned. When it comes to these private ownership, there are challenges in preserving and managing and utilizing the heritage. There are challenges. There are also merits. Maybe there are more resources. There are more flexibility in utilization, but there are also other challenges in managing the heritage. And here in Japan, we see that they will have these major supportive groups that provide consolation. And here, every year in the Zenkin General Assembly, you will see a lot of these discussions taking place. It's a bit like our historical monument day, but for the Zenkin annual gathering, they cover a lot of these in-depth discussions on related topics. I know my time is up, so here about Japan's modernization, heritage management, and preservation, I take this opportunity to share with you some brief points and my own insights, and I also look forward to discussing with all of you after this presentation. Thank you.
研究员精彩的分享 Thank you. And now we have one more talk, and to talk about the multi-layered cultural heritage preservation systems in Taiwan and the challenges, we'd like to welcome Assistant Professor Li Xiang Lu, Graduate School of Culture and Education Law, National Taipei University of Education. 接下来呢，我们有请国立台北教育大学文教法律研究所吕礼祥助理教授来跟我们谈台湾的多层次文化资产保存体系以及挑战。掌声欢迎 ，Please welcome him.
首先一样。
Good morning, everyone. I would like to thank the Bureau of Cultural Heritage for inviting me to the conference. Time is limited. I will begin my presentation right away. I was told that I would have about 15 minutes, and we are already behind schedule. I will be brief so that I could leave more time for Q&A. I am a law professor, so I will be focusing on the legal legislation aspect of cultural heritage. And I have studied a few cases here in Taiwan that has caused great controversy. So I will not be touching upon the philosophical, historical, or cultural aspect, or even the aesthetic aspect of cultural heritage. So I will be just solely focusing on case studies. This took place last week. National Taiwan University demolished the former residence of the late historian Mr. Cao and other dormitory buildings during the Japanese ruling period. And the local historians and activists were outraged and filed a petition to sue what they call the perpetrator. They filed a petition with the Ministry of Culture to have the demolition permit revoked, to stop any future demolition of this cluster of buildings. So where and how did the controversy arrive? Should Taiwan's Preservation Act be revised? Because currently the power is within the hands of the local government. So the government could issue such a permit. So when historic buildings like this are slated for demolition, the operators only have to receive permit from the local government without having to go to the Ministry of Culture. So in fact, according to the Taipei City Government Review Authority, Cao's former residents and others had never been listed as quote-unquote important cultural heritage. Therefore, they can be demolished after the operators apply for a demolition license from the Construction Management Office of the city government. There's no need to report this to the central government. Hence, a permit was issued. So now this presents a dilemma. Whose responsibility is it to determine whether a property is an important cultural heritage, important architectural heritage? Is it the local government's responsibility, or does it rest with the central government? The central government or local government authorities, or versus the local government authorities, who can decide the value in preserving the National Taiwan University dormitories built during the Japanese ruling period. In fact, according to the Constitution, Article 108, Paragraph 1, Clause 20, the following matters should be legislated and implemented by the central government or implemented by provinces and counties. Preservation of ancient books, antiquities, and monuments related to culture. And Article 166 states that the state shall encourage scientific inventions and creations and protect historical, cultural, and artistic monuments and relics. So the Local Government Act at the same time also stipulates that preservation of cultural heritage in specific municipalities are the self-government matters of specific special municipalities. And the same goes with the cultural heritage in these locations. So usually it is the local government's reflex that when they run into controversy, they would then go to the central government. And this had happened several times in the past when the local governments could not make the decision, so they went to the Bureau of Cultural Heritage for suggestion and advice. Now, the Cultural Heritage Preservation Act states that historic buildings refer to buildings and its ancillary facilities where historical events occurred or which are of value from the point of view of the history. However, this could be handled either by the central government or the local government, and that's how the controversy arises. So in a unitary system, the preservation of cultural heritage fall under the purview of central legislation and execution. When local government authorities handle matters related to cultural heritage preservation, it is normally considered in Taiwan a legal relationship of agency delegation. So if you look at the Japanese practices, there are two separate legal systems. The central government is in charge of national treasures, nationally designated cultural heritage, and the local governments have their own set of regulation. They designate their own municipal, local level cultural heritage, and they execute preservation plans. But it is not the same in Taiwan. There's just one Cultural Heritage Preservation Act that is being used by the central government as well as the local government. And the categorization, registration, and maintenance regulations are all fall under this one single act. So the local government, when executing the Preservation Act, they would need to follow all the implementation, regulations and details and the mandates of the central government. So, like I said in the previous act, in the current administration system for cultural heritage, special municipalities, counties, cities allocate jurisdiction based on region. That is, there is only division of labor, but no division of power. So if you look at the taxation system, the tax offices are scattered all around Taiwan. However, they all follow a set of federal law. So under this regulatory structure, there's very little room for the local government to make its own set of rules. So for Mr. Cao's historic residence, we need to look at Article 3 and Article 2, subparagraph 2 of the Cultural Heritage Act. Buildings, historic buildings refers to buildings where historical events occurred or which are of value from the point of view of history, art or science need to be preserved. So Mr. Cao's private residence, does it fit this criteria? So is it a location that holds collective memory of the people, of the local communities? So these sort of questions arise very frequently when it comes to the demolition of old buildings that have not yet been designated as cultural heritage. There are several cases of this nature. Sometimes a city government may discover an archaeological site, and then they proceed to make decisions regarding whether to preserve it or not. So I believe that it should be unified under the central government's jurisdiction. I think the conflict really arises because of the Local Governments and Autonomy Act that's present in Taiwan. So here, we could refer to the German statutory system and look at the idea of agency delegation. From my perspective, it will take at least 10 to 15 years for Taiwan to move in the path of the German legislation system. However, I believe it's worthwhile to study how they solve this conflict between the central and local legislation, and this will help us move in the right direction. Meaning that the local government authorities and the central government authorities, their relationship should be considered as a legal relationship of agency delegation. To reasonably construct a legal relationship between the central and the local government, under this theory, local autonomous authorities handle tasks assigned by higher-level administrative bodies, while simultaneously holding a subordinate position as an agency of the higher-level public entity, due status. They operate under the direction and supervision of the superior authority, and, in terms of administrative costs, the superior public entity should bear the expenses for carrying out these delegated administrative tasks. And I believe that's the direction that we should be headed to. If the current cultural heritage administration system is understood through the lens of the agency delegation theory, we will then be able to benefit from the following advantages. The central authority does not need to spend manpower or financial resources to establish direct cultural heritage preservation agencies in various regions. Two, the central authority can move legitimately and can more legitimately exercise both legal and purpose-oriented oversight. Third, local authorities, when carrying out tasks delegated from higher levels, can receive financial support, thereby alleviating their financial burden. There are disadvantages. Number one, this might reduce the capacity for local self-governance. The administrative capacity of local governments could be restrained, limiting their autonomy under the system. Number two, administrative relief challenges. Although local agencies act under the direction of their higher authorities, individuals seeking administrative relief must still file their claims with the higher authority. This could potentially reduce the efficiency of administrative relief processes. Third, lack of clear legal framework. There could be a clear regulation, and there should be such regulation of the legal relationship between the superior public entity and the delegated agency through an administrative contract. This agreement should be very clearly specified, and it should specify the arrangements regarding personnel, resources, and finances to avoid ambiguities. So the current Cultural Heritage Preservation Act mechanism for exercising the central authorities' supervisory powers is as follows. Number one, approval. Let me give you an example. The higher level government or competent authority reviews the matters reported by the lower level government or agency, makes decision, and thus refers and confers legal effect upon the matter. So this is the first method, named approval. The second method is filing for reference. This refers to situations where the lower level government or agency has full authority to handle certain matters. Once these matters have obtained legal effect in accordance with the law, they are then reported to the higher level government or competent authority for their information for the purpose of documentation. So here are just some of the structures, the legal structures that I would like to propose. For example, there could be different types of cultural heritage existing in the same space. Cultural heritage types designated and registered under Cultural Heritage Preservation Act should also be considered against those designated and registered under the Indigenous Peoples Cultural Heritage Protection Regulations. These are two different frameworks for designating and registering cultural heritage, which may lead to conflicts in terms of management and legal procedures when applied to the same site. So this has been an issue that has not been resolved. In the German legal system, the federal or the central government, in principle, doesn't hold the power of preservation. And it is governed by the Constitution. There's only a few exceptions. For example, the ban on international trade of national treasures. There's only a few articles in the Constitution which belongs to the federal level. And the states respectively handle their own matters related to cultural heritage preservation and maintenance as well as management. So Germany's cultural heritage administration system has a very clear decentralization of powers between the federal government and the states. I believe this is a system that's worthy of our study. What about Japan? According to my understanding, Japan has a system very similar to our country's unitary state system. However, a noteworthy cooperative relationship between the central and local government of Japan should be something that we can learn from. When the owner is unable to preserve or manage important cultural heritage, the Agency for Cultural Affairs of Japan designates a local public body or legal entity to assume such responsibility. So the Agency for Cultural Affairs of Japan belongs to the central government. This is not matters to be handled by the local government. So in such a case, the Agency for Cultural Affairs of Japan would designate a local public body or an organization or a legal entity to preserve and manage this important designated cultural heritage. So it is designated, handled by the Central Agency for Cultural Affairs, and it's executed by a local entity. Conclusion. Currently, the division of labor rather than the division of power system for cultural heritage preservation in local governments is unlikely to change in the short term. If we want to maintain the spirit of local autonomy, we could consider allowing cultural assets with strong local ties, such as historic buildings, local cultural landscapes, to have their review criteria set by local governments, rather by the central or federal governments, under the Cultural Heritage Preservation Act of Taiwan. Here I'm referring to specifically historic buildings that have very special meaning to the local communities, and the cultural landscapes that really has an influence on a wider range of local community members. Number 3, the central authority should adopt a unified approach in its supervisory methods, rather through what I just mentioned, the two methods, approval or filing for documentation and reference. The fourth point is that cultural heritage preservation, in essence, falls under central legislation and execution. Therefore, when there are doubts regarding the application of laws, it is recommended that the central authority take a more proactive role in terms of interpreting the law, in case of taking on a more proactive role when there are doubts regarding the interpretation or the application of the laws. Last point, the relationship between the central and local governments in cultural heritage preservation should move beyond just subsidies and budget execution to establish a more multifaceted cooperative partnership.
是有请我们的场次的所有的讲者以及主持人到台上来。Now would like to welcome all of our speakers, moderator back to the stage for the panel. 那我们同时呢加入我们这一场座谈的还有国立政治大学法学院吴清文副教授。And joining us for the panel, we also have Associate Professor Qingwen Wu, College of Law, National 政治 University. 好，我们有请我们的语坛所有的讲者就座，接下来就把时间交给我们的主持人严老师 ，and over to our moderator Professor Yan。
谢谢。时间。
We have limited time, but we would like to continue this wonderful discussion. So here we have invited our panelists for this session. Professor Wu from the College of Law, National 政治 University. He is also very versed in the cultural heritage area. Now, let's hand the mic over to Professor Wu. I'd like to thank the moderator and also thank the organizer for inviting me as a panelist for this session.
Caption， 不过我等一下会用中文。
I will deliver my remarks in Chinese. In the interest of time, I would like to respond to the three presenters first. And then I would like to return to the core theme of today's session 4. The theme is accountability versus empowerment. Regulatory responsibilities and empowerment. We're trying to take a legal perspective in understanding the role of laws in preserving heritage, cultural heritage. We also hope that we can examine this coherence between the real environment and the legal regulations. And here in the three presenters' talk, we hear there's very different angles. First of all, I'm very grateful to Professor Kono. He talked about the relationships between UNESCO World Heritage Conventions and the national legislations. He has focused especially on ICH, intangible cultural heritage. For example, Japanese performance arts and also traditional craft. You've also talked briefly about cultural natural heritage, but the main focus is on ICH. The second speaker, she is from Taiwan, but she also endeavored to give us her understanding of Japan's legal framework in preserving modernization industrial heritage. From Huang's talk, we also see that there are different actors. There is the government, the Ministry of Economy and Industries. There's also the Ministry of Culture. There are different government stakeholders. She also talked about public persons and private organizers or holders, how they can work together. And then in the third talk by Professor Liu, he gave us a very clear understanding of the roles of the local and central government, especially in terms of preserving historical buildings. He went in depth the many regulations and also potential legal revisions. On one hand, to strengthen the legal authority of central governments. On the other hand, through his talk, we understand that it's also important to give a certain level of autonomy, independence, power for local governments and organizations. These are very different talks. It's very challenging to find a common thread or theme, but I would like to share my own observation from two angles. I don't have a PowerPoint prepared, but I would like to share my two insights. I have also prepared questions for our three presenters. So first of all, from the legal perspective, when we talk about cultural heritage, despite its forms or categories, we know that there must be an operational guideline, the operational regulation. With these regulations, the government authorities know clearly how to handle the cultural heritage. For example, the Cultural Heritage Bureau of Taiwan is the main competent authority. And the same applies to people. With these set of legal guidelines and regulations, the government, the people, know what to expect, especially if they are the private owners of tangible assets, for example. They will know that they might carry cultural values. And for intangible cultural heritage, people also know that if they can preserve and promote these cultural heritage with cultural values, they will be recognized as an owner of this intangible cultural heritage. This is the importance of these clearly delineated regulations. It's important both for the government and for the people. But how do you set these standards? How do you set the regulations? This is a challenge that we all face. Professor Liu didn't talk much about the global conventions, but we look at these different standards. The initial motivation is to preserve the cultural heritage and trying to align with global standards. So you see this a global top-down approach coming out. And that is why very often when we look at these regulations, we look at the international conventions and standards first, and then we think about how to develop our own legislation. And with this way, with this mindset, first of all, international standards, they are very broad scope. From Professor Kono's talk, you also shared with us the terms, how the standards might differ, the criteria might differ. For the international conventions for registration, there are space for different countries to maneuver, to actually put these legislations into practice. Let me give you an example. World Heritage Site registration. We all know that there are 5 main criteria. I won't go into the details, but one of the criteria, it says that it has to represent the creativity, the genius of human beings. And also it talked about how it represents this human value and expression of a certain period in human history. So if we look at this very broad definition, how can we make it more substantial in our domestic context? Let's think about a historical building, for example, a built heritage, for example. Here in Taiwan, according to the law, it has to be a kind of building that represents regional characteristic. Earlier in the World Heritage Convention, it talked about of a certain period of time or of a certain cultural area of the world. So the two different descriptions that we've just heard, are they aligned? when you want to bring a World Heritage Convention to domesticate it, there are going to be challenges. And also the gaps between experts and common people. The value of buildings from the views of architects might differ from the common people. For experts, their idea of value very often differs from the common people's point of view. They will wonder the value. They look at a building, they might not appreciate the value of this this architecture in front of them. So there's going to be these different gaps. And how do we address these gaps? Different countries, different societies, there's different context, different historical backgrounds. And here we're talking about empowerment and also accountability. What are the issues? Here, these laws, they are these forcible laws. If you don't enforce them, there's going to be consequences. But what I have in mind is that there are two areas that we might be able to make changes. First of all, the soft law, we should also strengthen it. If you keep on talking about the penalties and the consequences, maybe at the same time, we can focus on the soft side. For example, the industries, they are spearheading all these practices, and it is the government's regulation falling behind, trying to keep up with these more advanced processes, more progressive practices in the private sector. So if we take that approach as a reference, for people, for private sector, are there any ways that experts and the common people, they can see their values converging, and they will be taking a more proactive approach? Another area of insight that I would like to share with you is the private ownership issue. A lot of these heritage, they hope to be designated as a tangible and intangible cultural heritage so that they can get resources. That's the case for public sector. But for private owners, they will have other calculations. So when we think about values, there are a lot of these areas where we have to think about cultural values. How can you really bring out the values of cultural heritage? And also, how can you allow the value systems of common people and experts to converge? And in doing so, it will be easier for us to implement, to put into practice many of the laws. So now I would like to raise a question for the three presenters. The first question, Mr. Professor Kono. In Japan, when we talk about aligning domestic legislations to international standards, what are some dilemmas that you face? And how did Japan address the dilemma in aligning international standards and domestic laws? And then for Professor Huang, you focus on the modernization industrial heritage. What can we learn from Japan's case? What are some areas where we can further improve? And then for Professor Liu, my question for you. You talked about the system. I very much agree with what you have shared. I also think that the division of power between central and local government is not very effective. But my question for you is that should we classify the different cultural heritage separately? For intangible cultural heritage, it might not be national. It might be local, more locally relevant. So maybe this is an area where local governments can exert stronger power. And these are my three questions for the presenters.
Thank you very much for your question, and perhaps I would touch upon your introductory part as well. I mentioned today the two UNESCO conventions, and the conventions from the international law perspective is so-called hard law. It's binding, so that the member states make a commitment to comply with these rules. This said, the two UNESCO conventions are very, very soft ones, and they don't have many obligations, especially the intangible cultural heritage. Well, in principle, both World Heritage Convention and Intangible Cultural Heritage Convention, how to legally handle cultural heritage, this is left in the hands of national legislation. So therefore, if you don't have a proper national legislation, you cannot ratify these conventions, the World Heritage Conventions. Even the Intangible Cultural Heritage Convention does not require any legislation. What the convention requires is only the inventory. So having a solid, properly functioning legal system in own country, this is absolutely important to let's say, to comply with, comply with these conventions. So the national legislation is the key for the protection. And and maybe the second point is that since this is a very softly designed convention, the role of soft law is very important. Soft law is very important. And in this context, well, there aren't many soft laws adopted by UNESCO officially, so therefore, documents adopted by experts play a very important role. So I mentioned, my previous speakers yesterday mentioned about Venice Charter, Florence Charter, I mentioned Nara document. These are the documents discussed and adopted by the experts group. But these documents play a very, very important role to fill the gap. So there's a very, let's say, lightly designed convention, and that we need a solid national legislation, and the middle is filled with this experts document, so-called. So you have to look at all three of them, and also you mentioned the operational guidelines, and there are 6 criteria to inscribe World Heritage as a World Heritage Site, very generally drafted, very abstract expression. So what you have to see is how World Heritage Committee decided. All the e-commerce recommendation for each nomination, and what the World Heritage Committee decided, how they formulated. So all these case law, so-called, I would say. So these are the documents to be visited. So then as a whole, you have a little better overview. So this said, I mentioned to your questions, I mentioned 2 cases of irritations caused by, in terms of 2003 convention. One is, the individual performance cannot be recommended, and also let's say, those items which do not require, let's say, skills to make hot spa available, accessible. You don't need to have specific skills. So, but this spa culture is very popular in Japan, but this is not recommended because of the Japanese laws approach, because which require skills. So there are some mismatches, so-called, and from a legal, from normative, I would say, normative perspective, probably the biggest challenge for Japan was the dismantling, almost the conservation through dismantling the buildings and repair and reassembling. So this sort of practice never existed in Western countries. So how to justify this approach and from a normative point of view, that was I think the biggest challenge. And now therefore the Nara document was adopted, and so that the dismantling, reassembling this practice is deemed as justified, although some European experts may not like it. But this has been practiced over centuries, and this, from normative perspective, there are some other issues, but perhaps what is also accepted, but the reinforcing the structure to make the building resilient in the case of earthquakes. So, the traditional wooden buildings and some steel frame to reinforce the structure. That doesn't look good, but the government decided to do that after the big earthquake in Kobe. So this is the sort of, indispensable mechanism to keep the big space made with a very fragile material like wood. So, but I stop here. Sorry, I talked too much.
谢谢主持人跟
Thank you, moderator. Thank you, all the panelists. I would like to add 2 points. I think going back to what I just said, subjectivity is an important issue here. We need to look at Taiwan's history and Taiwan's developmental trajectory, Taiwan's policies. Then we need to use these as a basis for reviewing Taiwan's act. Many of the cases, for example, salt drying, sugar refineries, they are important subjects for preservation, but they were all state-run enterprises. So it was the preservation efforts were a little bit lopsided. I believe there should be more public-private partnerships so the values of the public agencies and the industries and the private operators could be aligned. And this is my hope for the future. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Wu, for your question. To enhance this division of power, central government making the system more decentralized, I believe that we can start with certain categories of cultural assets. For example, landscapes, historic buildings, and cultural landscapes. But Professor Yan told me that it would be difficult to start with selected categories. I believe that to realize the division of power or the decentralization of power, we need to look at what really needs to be localized so we can legitimize the division of power. If there's no differentiated approach, there's no need for each municipality or city to have its own powers or rights. Take, for example, oral history, local customs, restoration techniques. Sometimes these could only be found in a small village or in an individual town. And for cultural assets relating to this category, I believe it could be handled locally. For example, the welcoming of the kingship, the Yingwang ceremony, is a really good example. It is only practiced in that specific Donggang town of Taiwan, and I believe it should be handled locally. Thank you for all your input. Regrettably, we have run out of time. I was informed that we are in fact behind schedule. I would like to provide a brief summary to conclude today's panel discussion. We have heard many keywords today, although we had discussions relating to legal topics. But I think capacity building and empowerment and globalization versus localization are the keywords that popped up in my mind. Professor Kono, talked about 1915, 1975, 2018. He gave us different cases. He talked about the evolutionary trajectory, how the concept has evolved over time, how Japan was able to adapt to world trends, the Nara document of authenticity, and then to Nala plus 20 years afterwards. They are exploring the connection and harmonization of globalization and localization. From highly technical skills to a more loosely defined folk art, they are both subjects for preservation. So here, I believe that keeping up with the time, keeping abreast of international trends and capacity building is the key. I think this really echoes the topics we discussed yesterday. With regard to Ms. Huang's presentation, she mentioned that when modernization process-related industrial cultural heritage is brought up for a broader discussion, we could refer to the Japanese practices, which is a clear categorization of the different industrial heritage. When you have a clear system, when you have a very, very clear inventory, it makes it easier and provides an important backbone and foundation for further discussion and management. And as for Professor Wang's presentation, he talked about the division of power, the decentralization of power. Who do we do it for? Whose responsibility is it to designate and manage and repair? And I think Professor Kono really shed a lot of light on the topic. We have the two conventions on top. And underneath those, we have the domestic legislation. Around 200 countries have adopted the World Heritage Convention. However, more than half of them have yet to come up with domestic regulations for preserving cultural properties. So in that structure, we see two important conventions on top. In the middle, we have the domestic legislation. What is missing in this picture is the documents, principles, and guidelines. The industry-related, professionally drafted regulations, Venice chapter, ethical principles, codes of conduct, especially when it comes to, for example, cultural landscapes and fortification and military heritage preservation guidelines. We will need further guidelines, descriptions, and details to fill in the gap. So Professor Kono highlighted the importance of filling these gaps. And I think that this is a very important takeaway from session 4 of the conference. I know I am carried away. We are behind time. We need to wrap it up. So once again, our sincere thanks go to all the panelists. Let's take a group photo.
我们接下来呢稍微休息一下，不好意思，我们时间有延误哦，所以我们短暂休息5。
We will take a 5-minute break. We are behind schedule, so we will take a shorter break.
用餐的时间，不好意思哦，请各位贵宾见谅一下。那我们稍微休息5分钟，等一下回到会场呢，我们还有最后一个场次的精彩讨论，大家不要错过了。Let's have a short break right now, and we'll be back in 5 minutes. We're sorry about the short break, and we'll be back by 10:55 for the last session of the forum. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Sorry, I took so much time. I'm sorry. Talk too much. Sorry. Thank you very much.
讲得很好啊，很好，而且提问提的就是说到重点。
Follow the recent amendments.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Very soon we have come to the last session of the International Forum, Deconstruction and Reconstruction, Military Heritage. 那很快的，我们已经来到了最后一个主题场次，要聚焦的就是军事遗产的解构以及建构。And now, please join me in welcoming your moderator, Professor Emeritus, Department of Architecture, National Cheng Kung University, Professor 曹景富。让我们掌声欢迎主持人，国立成功大学建筑系傅朝清名誉教授。
好，各位朋友哈。
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for staying with us till the end of the program. Let me introduce the last session of the conference. Military heritage. This is a topic I am very personally interested in. Taiwan is home to a number of important fortification and military heritage sites, from the fortresses built by the Dutch to the fortification structures constructed during the Cold War period. Some of these structures are still in use. However, a number of them have been turned into cultural heritage sites. I'm very pleased today that two speakers will talk about the regeneration and the reuse of fortification and military heritage. We have three speakers joining us today. Du Wang Cho, President of ICOMOS ICOFORT. And he is also a board member of ICOMOS. The second speaker will be Ms. He. She is in charge of planning and executing a regeneration project located in one of Taiwan's outlying islands, the island of Mazu, particularly with regard to Mazu's fortifications and military cultural heritage. And the third speaker, Mr. Zhen, is the director of the Research Center for Battlefield Heritage and South Fujian Architecture. He's a member of ICOMOS ICOFORT. He's also an associate professor at the Department of Architecture, National Taiwan University. And other ICOFORT experts who will also be joining the panelists, be joining the panel discussion, will be Mr. Wang. Mr. Wang is an associate professor at the Graduate Institute of Folk Arts and Cultural Heritage, National Taipei University. Also joining us today during the panel will be Professor Cheng from the Department of Architecture, National Taipei University of Technology. Without further ado, let's welcome the first keynote speaker, President of ICOMOS ICOFORT, Du Wang Cho.
Good morning. Dear distinguished guests and international scholars, again, my name is Du Wang Cho from Republic of Korea, and I'm president of ICOMOS ICOFORT as a board member of ICOMOS. At this place, I would like to express my sincere thanks again for invitation to this valuable international forums on Taiwan cultural heritage. I'm very pleased at this place to share with you all how to identify and preserve utilize the fortification and military heritage with the help of ICOMOS guideline on fortification and military heritage. First, I want to share how ICOFORT, as one of the international scientific committees of ICOMOS, serves ICOMOS technically. Desk review and technical evaluation mission, reactive monitoring, upstream processes, and preliminary assessment related to UNESCO World Heritage are the main representative technical functions of ICOFORT. ICOFORT operates based on the triennial plan Currently, it's 2022 to 2025. And currently, EcoFort has 167 members, including one institutional member. Furthermore, the number of conservation issues related to climate change or armed conflicts in specific geopolitical scenarios concerning fortifications and military heritage have recently led to the establishment of a conservation subcommittee in EcoFort. EcoFort researches and promotes the understanding, protection, conservation, and management of historic fortification military heritage, which include fortified structures, landscaped water areas, commemorative monuments, and military memorabilia, and intangible heritage. Now you see the procedure of the ICOMOS guidelines of fortification and military heritage, how it was initiated, revised, developed, finally adopted during the ICOMOS General Assembly 2021. Actually, that was submitted with the title of the EcoFort Charter, but due to the reasons, so very detailed guidelines, it was renamed as the ICOMOS guideline. The latest charter editing members are on the list, as you see. ICOMOS guideline on fortification military heritage consists of preamble, objectives, principles, and references. In detail, definitions, characteristics, and theoretical methodological objectives are subordinated. Furthermore, furthermore, the values and intervention are classified as important articles. I'd rather mention and emphasize on the keywords, conservation principles, to bring case studies related to the described ICOMOS guidelines. So firstly, the fortification and military heritage are considered and interpreted as a major link to the history of human settlement and nations and regions. That's why fortification-related words and phrases revealing each characteristic from different stages of the world history up to now can be verified and observed as testimony of humankind. What are objectives of these ICOMOS guidelines? It is to identify, define value, significance, specific problematics revealing each own circumstance, and protect in efficient way. As complex structures, their surrounding cultural landscape are important factor to identify and preserve. It means they form military cultural landscape. In other words, such a military cultural landscape has the internal relationship with the surrounding cultural landscapes having significant value which need proper conservation and protection measurement. In general, fortification and military heritage are to describe with the help of 5 different functional attributes conveying their authenticity. Barrier protection, command, depth, flanking, deterrence. Related element for defining terminology on each attribute can be seen on each note tables. Barrier and protection are essential attributes to safeguard human activity and settlement against external threat and resist attacks. With the introduction of firearms like matchlock artillery, as well as the shift from cold weapons like bows and spears, the height of watchtowers, keep, observation tower, redoubt, etc., so within castle or fortresses decreased. Walls were also transformed from earth to stone to effectively withstand artillery fire. Furthermore, when establishing a fortification system, defense facilities were strategically placed to hinder enemy advancement and to enable preemptive attacks. Natural rivers, man-made ditches, or moats were utilized to clearly demarcate the boundaries on both sides. The island coastline and cliffs, the entire island were utilized to construct fortification that functioned as autonomous fortresses. Command is the ability to monitor the area surrounding defense zone to the furthest extent possible to prevent the attacker from approaching. No matter how well constructed a fortification is, it is useless if there is no command and control system in place to execute its functions effectively. The operation of a command post overseeing the communication system between the inside and outside of the fortifications, facilitating direct communication between each fortification, and establishing a watchtower for communication or indirect signaling are essential elements of the fortification system. The typology of the Japanese fortresses located on the southern coast of the Korean peninsula explains the defensive strategy in depth. The Seoseong Japanese fortress in Korea consists of 2 outer walls and a main wall, strategically built at varying elevations to deter enemy forces from breaching the fortress walls and keep as a command post. Flanking largely strengthened the defense system by instilling separate military facilities on the flanks to protect the main fortification that performs command and control functions. To effectively observe the enemy's movement in detail, gaps in the defense network are made up by installing watchtowers on key terrain or installing lookouts, bastions, or batteries to protect blind spots that are difficult to observe from the fortress walls. Hue Citadel is an exemplary case of how the flanking facilities are well adapted to the natural setting. Deterrence is a defensive strategy used to deter the enemy from attacking by instilling doubt or fear of the consequences. This strategy can include a range of tactics, including the construction of a majestic enclosure and its defensive attributes. For example, multiple openings for shooting, the scale of gate and towers, decoration of walls. Entrance plays important roles in deterrence. Wooden fences installed near the castle, parapets around the top of the fortress walls, anti-tank obstacles constantly installed on the front line and enemy approaches. Mines and barbed wire fences are the means of deterrence. And all these facilities are included in the battlefield and constitute a military cultural landscape. The attributes of the fortification and military heritage are to diagnose through historical constructive evolution and stratigraphic and spatial complexity of the structure. External functional scope beyond its physical boundary is to take into consideration to understand the fortification from the view of its operational zone. A good example for this case, the World Heritage Site, Dutch water defense lines can be suggested. These sites are the case for major boundary for modification of UNESCO World Heritage. They are well conveying their functional attribute, strategically positioned setting, water management system, and military facilities. Such a fortification and military heritage needs to be researched and documented by using the relevant skills and expertise. For example, the participation of various stakeholders are very important. especially the role of site custodians or as site managers in collaboration with the heritage communities are crucial to conserve and utilize in sustainable manner, corresponding to the recommendation on the World Heritage Sustainable Development Goals of the UNESCO World Heritage Center. Promoting reconciliation of the military past with the subsequent reuse is more meaningful to a holistic integration of the heritage values to achieve a positive impact on visitors and the local community. A balanced reuse is in a sustainable and appropriate way to avoid destroying integrity and authenticity. Reuse that transforms fortification and military heritage into places which transmit a message of inclusiveness and reconciliation should be taken into account in each site. As for the mention, various interventions to conservation measurement on the fortifications should be conducted within a conservation master plan with the support of protection regulation laws compatible with the preservation of the integrity of the fortification. Conservation strategies of urban heritage is represented by the fortification system, the singular element, or the network as a whole within the broader objectives of general sustainable development should foster greater awareness of the need to understand and interpret fortification and military heritage as a component of international or transnational systems, territories, settlement, of urban ensembles and not as solitary and isolated structures. That's why holistic research and assessment is strongly needed to improve methodological tools for research and multidisciplinary understanding. From now on, different value-based approaches to the fortification will be explained. For example, as to World Heritage in Namsan-song. As in Korea, it preserved the distinct features of the world constructed since the 7th century down to the 19th century, especially so in the development of warfare. Furthermore, the pattern of the world construction of Namsan-song at the second half of 18th century was repeated World Heritage Site in Hwasong Fortress in Korea. It is interpreted as a monument having documentary value. In accordance with the anastylosis of the Venice Charter, the ruined wall at the archaeological site, for example, the World Heritage Site Masada in Israel, is reassembled. The upper part from the black line was reassembled from the ruin with the use of original materials. Architectural and technical value is easily to understand with the help of the evolution of weapons and warfare, so that innovative advances are responding to changes in military science and engineering. Such as earthworks in responding to the use of cold weapons can be suggested. Concerning territorial and geographical value, while the old town of Gale and its fortification in Sri Lanka, it is independently standing as an isolated element. Others may form part of the larger system of non-adjacent components that shape the surrounding cultural landscape and require evaluation in broader context. The reach of the defensive range and the topography and ecosystems of the territory of the Stato da Terra in Croatia, Italy, Montenegro can be also interpreted as a good example for describing the territorial and geographical values. Concerning cultural landscape value, In this sense, Masada in Israel, again, can be interpreted as a relict, military cultural landscapes constructed on a rocky hill overlooking the Dead Sea in the wilderness. The wall built on a sheer natural cliff made it difficult for the enemies to approach and promoted the preconceived notion that it was visually impregnable and thereby increasing combat deterrence. The royal palace and the major military facilities located in the fortress are arranged in such a way that it is easy to defend from the flanks. And it is an example of the organic arrangement of command and control and depth systems. The barracks, fortification, and assault lamps to Masada are the most complete remain of the Roman Empire's siege system. That can be found to this day. It makes full use of the natural environment and preserves the aspect of attacks and defenses between the conqueror and the conquered. In the case of World Heritage in Namansansong, it was the point conflict between the established East Asian order led by Ming Dynasty and the emerging order led by Qing Dynasty during the 17th century. Namansansong was completely reconstructed as an emergency capital along the terrain of its surrounding to create an extra large mountain fortress measuring 9 kilometers in length. In December 1636, the Qing army reached Namansansong without significant resistance and encamped to besiege the fortress. In January the next year, the Qing army launched an all-out attack on Namansansong, and artillery fire resulted in numerous casualties. After this war experience, Namansansong was equipped with the reinforced facilities such as several outworks, extended defensive works, and detached observation towers built in area occupied by the Qing army. Such military facilities could form effective firing defense zones, and nowadays all military facilities in their original natural landscape remain intact, revealing a military cultural landscape. The fortification is a symbol of the fusion of multiple types of knowledge. The strategic value of fortification reflects the power of decision and the depth of knowledge, as well as the social cohesion of the ruling groups. Rajghat, the first capital of Marathas in India, showcases an extraordinary adaptation of the hill, providing 360-degree views through the three extended outwards of the Suvela, Sanjivani, Padmavati markets, overlooking the surrounding valleys with the trade route and passes. They occupied a strategic location that enabled the long-term evacuation. Concerning human and anthropological value, as a testimony is associated with the site of conflict, hill fort of Rajasthan of India, especially Chittorgarh fort, was connected with the cruel battles and wars that resulted in one group being victorious over another defeated group. However, unlike many Rajput rulers, the Mewars didn't surrender to the Mughals' pressure. As remaining military facility through attacks by Mughal Emperor Akbar on Chittorgarh fort was a counter fort erected in 1567. They shaped a military cultural landscape which still remained intact. Fortification can play important role in the memory of the society. Fortification have an educational value because they can provide a stimulating environment related to the cultural experience of military heritage. Belgium and France applied for the World Heritage List 2017 for the funerary and memory site of the First World War Western Front as a cultural heritage. These sites are enlisted on the UNESCO World Heritage List in 2023 as a serial properties, where there are different perceptions of the site of memory, where there is a disputed place, where there are different views on its significance or history. The interpretation of the site can present complex problems. However, a careful and inclusive interpretation process can also be an excellent opportunity to unite communities with different perspectives. In case of World Heritage Hwasong Fortress in Korea, its value was recognized as a collection of fortress techniques from the East and West, and Shilhak, which means practical learning in Korean history. Hwasong Fortress was not only basis for the construction of filial piety toward his father, but also was created at the center of the political planning to reconstruct the country devastated by the two major wars in Korean Peninsula during the 16th and 17th century and strengthen the royal authority. It bears a historic value of fortification. Fortification retain tangible, intangible, material, and spiritual values and meanings. However, quantitative research should be actively carried out by focusing on the budget invested in heritage conservation and utilization. Through this, it is necessary to provide the feasibility of conservation and management of the heritage to persuade various stakeholders, including the communities living inside and outside the area where the heritage is distributed, and to consider ways to generate socio-economic effects such as job creations through heritage conservation and utilization. On the other hand, it is also necessary to visualize the value of heritage quantitatively. It is necessary to build the sustainable multidisciplinary capacity of the site manager in collaboration with heritage communities by expanding the budget for heritage conservation and utilization and the expertise of human resources, which is a prerequisite for heritage conservation. That's why it is to emphasize on all interventions which should be based on the master conservation plan. Here with the examples on the comprehensive conservation and management plan for the site of fortification in Korea, World Heritage Site of Namman Sansang, its content. They are all based on the holistic researches and integrated with various stakeholders. ICOMOS guideline on fortification and military heritage had an important relationship with the Zimbabwe Charter and citation of the triad of Vitruvian, who was Roman military architect for Caesar to guide understanding all intervention in respect for the compatibility with the historic status of the fortification. And it is strongly based on the safety and durability. As worldwide known, the Vitruvian triad are firmitas, utilitas, and venustas. They are well applied and gave influence on the urban development and architecture in the European region, and gradually it was delivered to by means of expedition and expansion of the European to other regions of the world. For firmitas, it is to understand as the mechanical compatibility between the historical materials and materials used for structural restoration and or consolidation, always preferring minimal impact intervention. For example, the work of rock at the foot of the fortification wall as a reference of the Renaissance treaty and its necessity to not falsify or recover the grade line with its true material. Utilitas as a functional compatibilities, it is the survival of the characteristic element of the fortification from the point of view of its original functional design and defensive layout of its route and accesses. For instance, Sturzenfeld Schloss in Germany is located at the Rhine River. its reconstruction carried out by well-known German conservator Karl Friedrich Schinkel was compatible with the historical and ruined status. He knew and gave respect at the original functioning of the Stolzenfels Schloss. Schloss means palace. That was essential for a compatible intervention. Making the original functioning of the building readable is the best way to explain it. And making it compatible with its original functional values is the only way to prevent its destruction. Here is the case for explanation of the Venus stars from the World Heritage. Namhansan of Korea is 12th auxiliary gate, a so-called secret gate, was restored in aesthetical compatibility with the original structure and setting. However, it also guaranteed the permanence of the stratigraphic reading prior to the intervention and the stratigraphic legibility of the intervention itself. These are important references which helped to make ICMO's guideline on fortification and military heritage. Thank you so much for your attention. 谢谢。
Thank you very much to Professor Duan Chou. 非常谢谢赵斗元主席的精彩分享。Thank you. All right, now moving on to the second talk in this session to share the project in Mazu. We'd like to welcome Daiwen He, Principal Architect of He Daiwen Architect's Office, Head of Wilderness Design Consultant, and Adjunct Assistant Professor, Department of Architecture, 中原 Christian University. 那接下来呢，我们就有请何代文建筑师事务所主持建筑师、艺人创合设计顾问公司负责人，同时也是中原大学建筑系的兼任助理教授何代文老师来跟我们分享。掌声欢迎 ，Please welcome her.
与会的先进，大家好。今天
Good morning, everyone. Today I will talk about reinterpretation and regeneration of Matsu Island fortifications and military cultural heritage. I will talk about the Nangan 1886 stronghold, a project that I've been working on, a sensory experience-based exhibition space. The Matsu government initiated the cultural translation project back in 2018. It is a forward-looking initiative aimed at the sustainable development of military heritage sites. Over the past years, we see that the Matsu battlefield cultural heritage had been preserved in a way to freeze them in time. But we hope that with our new approach, the heritage will not remain frozen, but instead carry the past forward into the future. Our project is dedicated to using the battlefield heritage translation plan as an innovative driving force and a platform aligned with the overarching vision of an island museum and an international art island to move toward the goal of sustainable development. The Matsu Islands have transformed from a battlefield administrative and Cold War military defense base into 13 national scenic areas. In 2010, the Taiwan Potential World Heritage Sites project listed Matsu's battlefield culture as one of Taiwan's 18 potential World Heritage Sites, and it was later selected as one of the 40 sites in the quote-unquote Creating Historic Scenes project. We see that the battlefield, from being designated as a national scenic area and all the way to being part of the Recreating Historical Scene project, Matsu has been reinterpreted in multiple ways. Pre-modern Matsu was referred to a society without a society by Harvard scholar Sunny Min Song because historically it had long served as a temporary shipping ground and trade island that followed the monsoon winds, with few permanent residents. It was not until the Nationalist Army landed and began to blockade the seas that permanent settlements took shape. As you could see, the coastal strongholds across Mazu's 4 townships and 5 islands are listed here, including 95 in Nangang, over 100 in Beigan, 77 in other outlying islands. As you could see, if seen from the sea, the many fortresses built on the rocks, the firing ports of these defense points appear as a series of densely packed holes, like eyes gazing out to the ocean from the steep cliffs, forming a battlefield cultural landscape with the primary goal of defending Mazu. So the Cultural Affairs Department stated its primary goal of transforming the island, which is to creatively repurpose the sites. By integrating design interventions, these military sites will be transformed into platforms that showcase the charm of the islands. Here we could see that the Mazu battlefield cultural landscape is an integrated military heritage comprising both natural and man-made, tangible and intangible elements. In 2021, a systemic registration of military cultural assets was carried out. As you can see, they are divided into 3 different levels: the historic aspect, the scenic aspect, and the aesthetic aspect. And there are different approaches to transform and translate these different assets. The regeneration project has been promoted, covering 14 different sites. As you can see, site number 77 has been selected, which is located towards the upper left corner. And the site that I'll be focusing on is site number 86, which is located toward the center upper corner of the map. As you could see, 4 sites had already been selected as a pilot, as part of the pilot projects. And one of them, which is number 86, Stronghold number 86, will be turned into an exhibition space, which offers sensory-based an introduction to the island culture. So here's the site. And we want to focus on connecting the island, the land, the ocean, and the collective memory. There will be an underground space, and the space of the stronghold will be developed into a 5-sense interactive space. We call it a sensory library. So how do those with first-hand experience perceive the battlefield's historical environment and the issues of cultural sustainability and development? In the face of the complex and multifaceted interpretations of battlefield culture, what is the authentic text of perception and interpretation that we will seek to uncover? What is the significance of the value, characteristics of the bunker, tunnel, cultural landscape? What aspects of the battlefield sites need to be restored? Through what new practical methods can we translate and create meaning? So we believe that in the understanding of interpretive presentation and translational reconstruction, interpretation is essential. It is an act of translation. So now I would like to show you the special features of the site, which is the location of the project, the sensory library that we're working on, number 86. We have a lot of materials to work on: the landscape, the bunker itself, the underground space, the shafts, the ammunition warehouse, the underground tunnels, and the living quarters of the soldiers, the barracks, and as well as the command post, the barracks kitchen, dining area, just to name a few. We also want to mention that to prevent enemy frogmen, quote unquote, or Chinese Navy from climbing ashore. Matsu's coastline was heavily fortified. Moving from sea towards the land, the defenses include naval mines, rail stakes, glass shards, barbed wire, sisal plants, coastal minefields, and guard posts. It was not uncommon for locals to be killed by landmines. The landmines that were meant to defend against enemies while collecting shellfish along the shore. So we believe that this sort of memory should be appropriately represented. So we have come up with this plan to divide the assets into 3 different categories. One's to represent, one's to repair, one's to interpret. So we started collecting tags, including the air, the plant, the waves, the currents, the sand, and the light. So we operated a lot of these workshops, and we went into a lot of the underground tunnels and fortresses. Sometimes, and we observed a lot of interplay of light and shadow. There are also these glass shards that were part of the defense system. They were installed onto the rocks to prevent enemy from approaching the island. We also conducted oral history collection, exploring authentic texts, collecting content from modern literature and novels, primarily from the perspective of islanders and their childhood, their awareness, understanding of battlefield life, and tunnel strongholds. And we also conducted through field observations, very thorough observations, oral interviews with islanders and the residents to create authentic textual content of our narratives. So we thought we would have 3 different books or approaches. The Book of Time refers to the historical space narrative. The Book of Memory, referring to experiential space narrative text. And the Book of the Seabed, or the Book of the Sea and the Land, which refers to the existential space narrative. So we also include the local school children and the local teachers. In fact, it is interesting to note that the birth rate on this island is the 2nd highest in Taiwan, only next to the Hsinchu Science Park. So it's interesting that we believe that we need to invite the teachers, the parents, and the children to visit the site and to be part of our focus groups. So we would share our topics with them and discuss how we plan to use the space and to see what they think about it. And here are some of the people or interviews that I have conducted. We wanted to know what their needs are. They need more educational materials. And as you could see, a lot of the outdoor spaces on this island had been turned into tourist attractions. So the local community's voices is that there would be more resources created for the family, for recreational purposes, specifically for the local community, for schools outings, for learning opportunities, a lot of more leisure spaces for the local people. And the Nangang number 86 site is blessed with a lot of different geological formations. For example, the nearby Zebra Rock geological feature is one of its kind. There's also the volcanic intrusive rock, which could only be seen if you're approaching the island from the ocean side. So we thought when in our communication and interaction with the local groups, we gradually learned about their aspirations, their reimaginations of the island. And so this gave us a very fresh perspective. As you could see, all these glass shards had been embedded into the rocks, especially near the coastline. Sometimes over time, the glass shards fell down or are disintegrated because of the corrosion of the coastal air. So you could still see clearly the marks left by the fortification. One resident told me that for me, sea has always been very unfamiliar. Though every day when I step outside, I could see the ocean, I grew up accustomed to keeping my distance from the coastline because we're not allowed to go near the coast. It was built to fend away the enemy. In school, teachers repeatedly reminded us not to go near the coast, especially areas surrounded by barbed wire and the mines. And that was our forbidden zone, a secret realm, much like the countless hidden military camps scattered across the island's mountains. For us, the sea remains unfamiliar. The children normally do not know how to swim, and the battlefield blockade of the coast made us fear the sea. We never saw the coastline as something beautiful. It was not until many, many years later, when the restrictions were lifted, that we began to truly explore and understand the natural landscape surrounding our homes, the front and the backyards of the island's coastline, with the same curiosity as visiting the foreign land for the first time. And this is collected from our interview from Ibu and Raymond. They made their way, according to them, that they normally make their way through the minefield together. The two brothers said that beneath the thick grass, there was a small path where we would often walk in order to go home. We would fear that we would step on landmines. So by collecting these sort of memories from the local people, we were able to construct the main structure of our narratives. I believe it's important to base our exhibition on the local text. The currents, the sea, the color of the ocean, the geological formations, the sounds, and the light, the plantations, the coastal area, and the people's memory. So we started collecting the different materials, for example, the fragments of the barracks and the base hard granite stones and the sharp glass shards. They have all been smoothed and rounded by the waves and the passage of time. So you can see all these glass shards all their edges have been rounded, and the local children call them the gems from the sea, and the local children collect them. So just this transformation going from sharp edges to the rounded gems, from confrontation to openness, from hidden icons and military training to embracing the past. So we believe that through the function of spatial narrative, the overall significance of landscape connections can be produced, evoking the memory of historical battlefield heritage sites. This process reveals how the world, space, and place are interpreted and utilized by the people. It also highlights how the translation of the sensory library and the multiple restorations of the living world influence the cultural continuity and impact on the island life. So like I said, we decided to create 3 storylines: Mazu and the surrounding sea, Mazu memory, and the history of Mazu. These are the 3 storylines that we will present in our exhibition space. This will be a space that's based on sensory experience. There will be 3 layers and 3 narratives, 3 storylines. They will be presented in the underground space. We have a lot of installations to welcome visitors into this underground exhibition space. Like I'm showing you here, as you could see, that the first space is about the color of the ocean. And there will be opening allowing you to watch the sun rise. There will also be an observation space that showcase the texture, local textures, local landscapes, and plantations. And there will be also a very specific space dedicated to presenting the local memory, oral history, childhood memory. For example, here we're presenting a narrative like this. Taking shelter from artillery in the airway tunnels has been a routine for Raymond, as long as he can remember. Always at that time, in that space, fate seemed to force him to wait here, beyond his control, as if he was trapped. Only when the shelling ended could he return to his own time. So we present oral histories, memories of the local people in the space. And here I'm showing you even more different utilization plans of the space. You could also see the firing ports from the fortress. Now we're opening up a little bit further. So this space would then be transformed into a newly interpreted structure like this one. And the grassland and the tunnels beneath the grassland would be opened up further so that you can stand at the ground level and look up. Well, while you look up, you can see the clouds in the sky, the birds soaring across the sky, and the rays of light kissing your cheeks, and the starry night at night. So these are all the different seasons and times where you can come and enjoy the scenery of the Mazu Island. So Mazu Island and the tunnels will no longer be dark. They will no longer be hidden out of sight. So we also have created this installation that's really focused on showcasing the mussels, the barnacles, and oysters that cling to the rocky reefs. Exposed to the scorching sun during low tide, only for a fleeting moment before the sea rises again. On a night of the Mid-Autumn Festival during the high tide, you could come here and listen as the tunnel, like a throat, echoing the sea's powerful and majestic roar, carrying the sound of the crashing waves. So this pertains to the sound installation. And in response to the cultural and the biological diversity here, we are creating this installation, which comes with this poem. At the firing port, closest to the tide, a soft form gently covers it. The lamp post on the rocky reef ahead serves as a reference for the tide's movement. The tidal range fluctuates by 2 meters, and this is the island's scale of difference. The scent of the sea is strong, and the waves crash against the rock, performing various dances. So these are all the different senses that we would like to cater to. We reinterpret the battlefield cultural landscape and living memories, unfolding the spatial translation of battlefield heritage through a multifaceted approach. Participants are invited to rediscover the environment, history, and memory through our reinterpretation and representation of the former military site, while experiencing them with all of their 5 senses. Reflecting on the impact and role of battlefield cultural heritage, tourism, and cultural governance. Seeing the sea again, we realize that the sea is not a boundary, but a pathway that connects all of us. Thank you.
请主讲人国立金门大学建筑系副教授，同时也是战地史基与闽南建筑研究中心的主任曾义仁老师。And next, please welcome Associate Professor, Department of Architecture of Jinmen University, 义仁曾，掌声欢迎。
好，谢谢大会的邀请哈。那我想。
Like to thank the organizer for the invitation. I only have 20 minutes, so I'm going to be brief. So our first speaker, Mr. Zhao, he has already given us a very good overview and also the principles at the international level. Most of us, we are not very clear with the core characteristics of military heritage. That's not only the case for the common people, but also for many others. Usually, we don't get the chance to have access to these military heritage. In Quemoy and in Mazu, after the Cold War, we have seen these huge amounts of military heritage. I've visited Mazu many times, but the military side, they're very conservative. They're not very willing to open to the public, so there's so many things that we still don't know. And here I'm going to share with you some challenges we face and also the future possibilities. Again, fortifications are built by people for survival, self-defense, for safety, whether those are from the 16th, 17th century to Cold War period. They were built in those specific eras for specific periods. The density on a small island can be very high, but another important aspect is that the functions are no longer present. Here we see the Normandy Landings Memorial in France. It's a very huge area. I visited it this August. Yesterday, Professor Fu talked about the future of heritage, resilience, responsibility, and also innovation. Last year in ICOMOS meeting in Sydney, we've also talked about this. So there's this future aspect, forward-looking aspect. We're not trying to just freeze it in the past, but we are forward-looking. Coming back to Taiwan, the military heritage in Taiwan over the last 400 years, many of these periods are tied to international trends. I talked about the recent Cold War, 1945 to 1991, but you can also look back further in the future. You look at these different periods from the Dutch, Qing Dynasty, Japanese ruling to Cold War period. Here in Taiwan, as of this month, Taiwan has designated a total of around almost 2,923 monuments, historical buildings, cultural landscapes, historical sites, and among them, around 222 of them are military heritage sites. They also include military dependent villages. And we see in terms of the time periods, 103 of them come from the Japanese ruling period. And also, you can see that a lot of these are like dormitory, military dependent villages clusters. So here there are the different classification by years, by type. And you see that we have devoted a lot of resource in taking an inventory. Here in Quemoy and in Matsu, there's still a huge amount of military structures. At its peak, Matsu had 100,000 soldiers. And the number has significantly dropped, the number of soldiers, and there's now these huge structures that are left untouched. Actually, we also have a representative from the Ministry of Defense. And we've been talking about all these structures. Nobody is managing them. How should we handle them? And also with the weather, with the huge rains, these are the issues, challenges that we are facing. Coming back to the characteristics of military heritage, we understand that they are multi-layered. I have found this map from the 1980s. And you can see the multi-layers, the systematic structure. You see the coach, anti-landing pile, the mines. You will see layers and layers of infrastructure. Single point cannot represent the entire structure. And let's take Kinmen or Quemoy, for example. Earlier, we talked about Matsu, and this one is Kinmen. There's the main Kinmen Island, and the small Kinmen Island is very close to Hanoi in China. So here, just to clarify, Kinmen and Matsu, they're actually 250 kilometers apart. So here, there are 200-something sites that we have numbered as military heritage. It's really a high density. Most of the heritage are on public military lands. Now, Kinmen only has 4,000 soldiers. The military is not able to manage these sites, but the local government also does not have the capacity. So this is one of the main challenge. And then here, these are the shooting fortress. And here we see that each fortress, they have their different functions. Some are the land, some on the hill. They are connected to the main mother fort. There's subsidiary forts. So you cannot just maintain single fort as it is. You have to really look at it more holistically. And here I have highlighted this systematic view and also the single site view. This is the example, the Shuangru Shan Tunnel in Kinmen. Here you can see the map, all the different tunnels, underground tunnels. There are also a lot of barracks and also trenches and strongholds surrounding the entire tunnel area. So around 1970s, there are a lot of tunnels. The land actually is already returned back to the government. The military is no longer there. But we go back, we look at the structure, we realize that the military's perspective is very holistic, very systematic, very different from our previous understanding. And again, here, the ICOMOS guideline on fortifications and military heritage. We talked about how the preservation of landscape and military heritage are really very closely tied together. These are the Dadan, Erdan battlefield landscape. Starting from this October, it's opened up to the tourist to visit, but the military base is still there. So here we think about this situation. There are soldiers there, there's many visitors. How do you manage these sites? So this is the Mazu battlefield cultural landscape. In the future, we will be shouldering more responsibility in managing, preserving these sites. And here, Kinmen, Mazu, we have faced these challenges. A lot of these sites are frozen in the past. And for the veterans, when they go back to Mazu and Kinmen, they also want to see the heritage sites as they are. But for the modern tourists, they might have different expectation. So you have the reality is that there are so many of these sites, we're not able to manage them, sustain them. And in that case, it's really hard to sustainably manage on these places. You look at the structure, they are often hidden, concealed. They have unique structures. There's often limited space. There are tunnels, strongholds. You see so many tunnels in Kinmen, for example. They're now storing out liquor. But by storing liquor, you're not able to reveal a lot of its original functions. And then you look at the structures. It's often not visible on the ground, but you go underneath. They're very complicated systems. In the past, we just leave them as they are. It's more static. But now we are talking about reactivation or repurposing of these spaces. These are the developments that we are seeing, spatial reactivation and repurposing. Here, I would like to bring your attention to Tokyo Bay, the number C3 seafort in Tokyo Bay. Here, they brought the structure from sea to land for exhibition. And here, it's more like a static exhibition. That is what most military heritage sites are handled, more like a static, passive exhibition. Here in Kinmen, we've also spent a lot of resources creating these spatial experience and exhibition. And we try to put a play, trying to explain what it used to be, but it's really hard to maintain, to really revitalize it. And here I would like to bring your attention to this refurbishment war bunker in the Netherlands. I understand that we have different climates, so we can't really preserve these forts in this way because of the humidity. But this is a case we can refer to. And here I would like to talk about the reinterpretation of military heritage. We can intervene in different degrees. We can also incorporate modern elements. These interventions are to ensure the reuse in the future. When we see so many of these sites having to be managed, here again we talk about reinterpretation. forward-looking design, how to inject a new life, and also the blending of new and old environments to represent new spatial values and meanings, while also ensuring heritage integrity. This is another example from Denmark. Esbjerg. This is from 1944, a cement fort by the German army. And here you can see the entire space. Here, education is very important. Usually, traditionally, we say who won, who lost. But when we talk about forward-looking, we have to take a better and educational approach. I've also visited another site also in the Netherlands. This is part of the World Heritage Site, a water defense line, and you can see how the old buildings and the additional buildings are integrated. And for the additional buildings, they are now a spa center. So you see how these structures incorporate the new needs of the space, and such a new addition is able to respond to modern people's life. Coming back to Mazu, we understand our limitations. We've learned about 86 Stronghold earlier, and this is Stronghold 26 in Mazu. Here you can see its very unique corner location, and through representation, through interpretation, we are able to create this new spatial usage, this new space that is very friendly to the visitors. It's no longer like a concealed, hidden space. This is also a very important purpose when we talk about the repurposing or revitalization of these heritage. So here we talk about the overall systematic value. It is not one single point. It is value accumulated over time. There is depth in its history. And also, it's not one single point. It is connected points forming a system. Here we are looking at cases where they're blended with the natural environment, where they can interact with the surrounding communities, and by doing so, you can create more future sustainability. Again, we are looking at these unique features of fortifications and military heritage. And here, with these efforts, these are important educational and economic resources. So we learned about the case World War I. It's actually until last year that it became registered as a military heritage. It really takes time to understand its past, to be able to understand its value in education and also for the future. We have all these resources, heritage in Mazu and Jinmen. It is also our responsibility to continue to learn about it, to align with international practices. I also want to learn from you to rely on your expertise in discussing about managing such a huge amount of fortifications and military heritage in Mazu and Quemoy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we move on to the panel discussion. We'd like to welcome back our moderator and also our speakers and two panelists to the stage. 那我们就有请我们刚才的三位讲师 ，Please welcome Du-Won Cho, Professor Cho again to the stage. 也要有请何代文建筑师、曾义仁老师、傅朝清教授。那同时呢，加入语坛的还有我们台北科技大学建筑系的张坤正副教授，以及台北大学民俗艺术与文化资产研究所的王纯熙副教授。And joining us for the panel, we also have Associate Professor Kunjun Zhang, Department of Architecture, National Taipei University of Technology, and Associate Professor Chunxi Wang from the Graduate Institute of Folk Arts and Cultural Heritage, National Taipei University. 那接下来有请傅老师。
好，那我们谢谢三位。
Thank you so much. I would like to thank the presenters for their excellent presentations. We have two more panelists joining us. In the interest of time, I would like to ask each one of them, Professor Chang and Professor Wang, to share their thoughts and provide their feedback. After that, I would then open it up for general discussion. We might even take questions from the audience. If there is any time left, we may be able to take 1 or 2 questions. So, Professor Chang, please provide us with your feedback. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm pleased to be here. I would like to thank the 3 presenters for sharing their insights with us. As a panelist, I would like to share some of my thoughts after listening to the 3 presentations. Dr. Cho's presentation made me realize that the military service is compulsory in both Taiwan and Korea. I served my military. I did my military service as a part in the infantry of the Taiwanese Army. It was a time when Taiwan procured a batch of army trucks from the United States. So a lot of new structures would have to be adjusted. I remember it was a time that at our camp, there was already discussion about what modifications can and should be made to the structure, to the existing structure. So this really reminded me of the years of military service that I did. I just want to say thank you, Dr. Cho, for bringing us fresh perspectives and talking about the criteria for registering and recognizing fortification and military heritage according to ICOMOS ICO4 standard. In Taiwan, the system is yet to mature and be further developed. The previous session explored the preservation of modern industrial heritage. The speakers talked about the importance of creating different categories. I feel that for the fortification and military heritage, we need to do the same. We have to take that first step. Dr. Cho also talked about the definition of the military and fortification heritage. I think it's very helpful. And it applies to military heritage in Taiwan, too. I think we need to come up with a very clear and operational definition for fortification and military heritage in Taiwan as well. So thank you for sharing. And Ms. He talked about her project of transforming the fortresses in Matsu Island. Whether it's industrial cultural heritage or whether it's a more recently emerged categories, I think we face similar challenges. Recently, a stronger focus has been placed on treating such heritage as cultural landscapes. When conducting various case studies, and also I'm basing this on my own personal experience, I feel that the military heritage really is a global phenomenon. Let me give you an example. While I was conducting my research regarding the fortresses built toward the end of the Qing Dynasty, and around the time before the Qing France battlefield, we see that a lot of new technology were introduced into Taiwan. And after the battlefield, Taiwan decided to go for the British defense system. So we see that the fortification methods and different schools and different applications have evolved over time. I also studied the fortresses built in Taiwan during the Meiji period. Taiwan, during the Meiji period, was considered as a strategic vantage point. During the Meiji period, Japan was at war with Russia. However, the Russia war never really involved Taiwan. Nonetheless, Taiwan was considered as a part of the defense system, so many fortresses were constructed in Taiwan as a result of that. So this will be an interesting topic to explore. I am also an architect by profession. I also am involved in a number of architectural design projects. As I teach in university, I often encourage my students to think outside of the box, to exercise creative thinking. And I think that's the greatest value we can bring to military heritage. I think we all bring our own personal value and perception to the topics. I've been involved in cultural heritage and military heritage preservation and research for over 30 years. I would like to give you an example to illustrate my point further. I have been involved in traditional architectural design studies for years, particularly with the focus on fortresses and military fortifications. In the olden days, or in the local historic records, historic sites are often defined differently as how we perceive them today. And I think that in the olden days of Japan, there were also different registration methods and definition of what constitutes a historic site. In the old local records of Taiwan, historic sites are often described a place that invokes a sense of nostalgia, that invokes an emotional response. That's the first aspect. And the second aspect of the definition refers to, my time is up. I will be brief. Just let me finish. If you've been to the Lin family's mansion in downtown Taipei, right? So what is another aspect of its function? It inspires creativity, especially for the literati. In the local records, the functions of these historic sites in the ancient times, it's about writing poems, it's about being inspired by the landscape, wandering around the garden, feasting your eyes on the magnificent architectural features of the historic sites, and create new art pieces. So what does this have to do with military heritage? Glenn McCurk, a Pulitzer Prize awardee from Australia, has been studying indigenous architecture. He talked about walk or tread carefully and lightly on the land of the indigenous people. So I think we also need to look at the artistic and inspirational value of historical sites, or of the fortification and military sites that we're discussing now. In 2016, I was commissioned to carry out a project to create an inventory of historic sites around Taiwan, and this was back in 2014 and 2015, because there was an unexpected amendment to the Cultural Preservation Act in 2016. And I was tasked with surveying and creating an inventory of military cultural heritage sites. This is a very special task given to me by the government. And I wouldn't assume that I was successful. Especially we encountered a lot of setbacks because we were often not granted access to a lot of military bases, military sites around Taiwan, making our survey efforts, making surveying these sites very, very difficult. As I mentioned earlier, some of the fortifications or fortresses are located on a cliff or on a vantage point that is geologically extremely difficult to access, making it easier to deter the advancements of our enemies. And all of these fortresses I was tasked with surveying are still under the jurisdiction of Taiwanese military.
Let's take the Keelung Port, for example, the entrance of Keelung Port. You look at the hills, there are actually fortresses surrounding the entrance of Keelung fort. And these forts have a long history. So when I entered that base, I saw a very serious issue. The military is still using these structures. So when we talk about the revitalization of these military sites, there's actually emerging needs, or there's evolving needs from the military. So for military site, in addition to our efforts in reinterpreting them, opening them up to the public, for the military heritage sites that are still managed by the military, I believe that there's still so much work that we have to do. And this is my very brief response, responding to the three presenters. And now let's invite Professor Wang. Okay, so I will try to be brief. I am a member of ICO Fort and also ISCCL. And here, looking at these different topics, there is some alignment. There are also some similarity when we talk about preserving and managing cultural landscape and military heritage. So we talked about the importance of military heritage, its ties with cultural landscape, and also the restoration of military heritage, however, is different from restoring cultural landscape. So very often we want to keep its original stage, but sometimes we take a modern approach. Again, we have to come back to the core principle, which Professor Kono has also talked about retaining authenticity and also classifying the different degrees. This is rather important. And also when it comes to military heritage, it might be related to these more sensitive heritage of the modern times. Different people might hold different ideas, especially when these sites are related to modern conflicts. There are guidelines that we can refer to, especially when it comes to these more controversial and conflict-related military sites. And for the military heritage, when we want to reuse them, it is important to have a sound design process so that the value of the military heritage could be indeed agreed upon by the majority. And this is where the designer, the architect, plays a very important role. Finally, we talk about systematic preservation. This applies both to military heritage and also to cultural landscape. But in Taiwan, when we want to put this idea into practice, we still need more support from the legal environment to really put such an idea into practice. And this is my sharing. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Wang, and also Professor Zhang. So we only have limited time today. How about we invite our three presenters? Are there any things you'd like to add? Maybe 2 minutes each for you to add or respond. Is there any other comments you might have? How about let's start from Professor Zhao from Korea.
Did you hear me? Okay. Thank you for your comment. And At first, I would like to mention regarding interventions of military heritage and also fortifications mainly. So we have actually the history, and also, the history delivers the significance, value of the heritage site. And this history shaped and forms a kind of authenticity conveying attribute. This attribute should be protected in right manner, not so majorly intervened. For example, in the name of reconstruction or restoration, or we can verify or classify major reconstruction or major minor reconstruction. But mainly, the main aim is actually to preserve this historic status of the military heritage. That's why it is very important we have to give the respect for originality, original form, design. That is the first point. And the second point is, and then we have to consider how to conduct this intervention in terms of compatibility. First, the original structure form, and then our thought, our consideration should be carried out. That's the point. And then the other ones related to our last field survey, I asked actually what does it mean, Zhushan? Railway station name, Zhushan. Actually, Zhu, maybe my pronunciation is so inappropriate. That means a celebration. This station is located on the highest point of the mountain range. And then, okay, it's Japanese applied to build this whole range of structure of the railway. And maybe it is the Sino-Japanese cultural zone area. It's very common. We are respecting for the nature, for the mountain, for the forestry. That's why, even though they wanted to cut so valuable cypress forestry, they would give celebration, ritual ceremony, and so on. But okay, so you have another meaning. In this sense, matsu and also kinmen, what does it mean? The topographical place of name. And then from then you begin these cultural studies, researches, and combining the military engineering. That is my opinion. Thank you.
好，谢谢。那你们两位来看谁？
How about the rest? Would you also like to respond? Yes. So for Kinmen and Matsu, it's quite unique. If you've never been there, it's really hard for you to imagine the topography and also the geology. If you have never been into the tunnels, it's really hard for you to understand this entire military structure and system. So here, we're not only trying to preserve them, we're also thinking about future usage. That's the situation in Kinmen. And for Matsu, that is not really an issue yet, but for in Kinmen, a lot of these sites are on private-owned land. So it's really challenging. For Matsu, the population density is not as high, so the tension is not as great. So we are really working in Kinmen a lot, and there's often clashes, a lot of tension. And I really welcome you to come here, come to Matsu and Kinmen to really understand the reality that we are facing. Here, 2 minutes. So once again, I'm very grateful to the Bureau of Cultural Heritage for the invitation. And here in Matsu, we have worked in Matsu for 6 years already. It's really not easy in this battlefield, handling this very unique heritage site, whether it's a piece of architect. Like I said, it's a library, but there's so many issues that we can discuss, and also its remoteness. But I'm very grateful to the support from Bureau of Cultural Heritage. We have a very unique team, and therefore we are able to work on all these different projects. It's really not easy. Transportation-wise, it's really not that easy to get to. And also for these strongholds, we were about to finish, but then we also faced challenges given the weather conditions. So in Matsu, I really hope that you can come to experience for yourself, to really understand the charm of the islands. And also, this is not limited to tourism, to cultural tourism. I also hope you get to interact, to know the residents. That's what I'm trying to do over the last 6 years. Along the process, I've learned about what the locals are thinking. It was really not easy when they were going through that constant shelling years. It's a really unique environment. How are we able to bring these characteristics more visible to others? Taiwan is very unique in the sense our history, our own subjectivity, how we interpret, understand our past, the different periods from the past. We are not trying to erase a certain historical period or a certain generation. These are all what makes us so special. And this is my sharing. Thank you. So this is the final session. Here, I would also like to open up to one last question from the audience. Maybe 1 or 2 questions from the audience in closing. We want to make sure that it is a brief question. If not, then we will just close the session. Okay. So if there are no further questions from the audience, I would like to close this session. Once again, I would like to thank the 5 scholars, experts on stage for your sharing. Military heritage, this is unique, more unique category. We talked about the cases in Kinmen and Matsu. In the past, these are military sites, but now we call them military heritage. In the past, when it was controlled by the military, there was no connection with the people, with the nature. But now that is starting to change. We look at the military heritage sites in these 2 islands of Taiwan. There's really a strong mission here. We are trying to reconstruct the relationship between people and nature. It is not just restoring these structures. It is to restore the relationship between people and the natural environment. And this is one of our very key missions. So once again, a big applause to our 5 speakers on stage. Also invite you to take a photo together.
留步，那其他的贵宾我们可以先回座，我们先到舞台中间合照。各位贵宾，我们最后呢还会有简短的这个总结的场次哦，请大家都可以继续留在现场。OK, let's have a photo for all the speakers of session 5。好，我们往中间稍微移动。好，一起合照。好，我们再次掌声，谢谢我们场次舞的所有老师，也有请傅小青老师在台上留步一下哦。Thank you once again, and very soon we will come to the very end of the International Forum. And to share with us some concluding thoughts, we'd like to bring out some of our speakers back to the stage again. 那最后的总结场次呢，非常荣幸为大家邀请到有文化部的徐怡君次长，我们掌声欢迎。Let's welcome Vice Minister Yu Zhenxu of Ministry of Culture。当然还有文化部文资局的陈继明局长 ，Director General Jimin Chen, Bureau of Cultural Heritage, and also would like to welcome once again Vice President Susan McIntyre Tamway of ICOMOS。我们要有请 ICOMOS 的副主席 ，and also Professor Toshiyuki Kono, Honorary President of ICOMOS， 以及 ICOMOS 的荣誉主席、合约主席。好，那接下来呢，我们把时间交给次长。
好，谢谢。我想因为大家。
In the interest of time, I will be brief. On behalf of Ministry of Culture, I would like to thank you for your participation over the past 2 days.
这2天跟我们分享。
I also want to thank our distinguished guests from ICOMOS for joining us over the past 2 days. If they have talked extensively about international trends, international conventions, best practices from different corners of the world. We have covered a lot of topics during the course of the conference. Now I would like to ask Professor Fu to first share some of his thoughts with us. He had talked about the sustainable development of the cultural heritage as we move towards our future goals. So, Professor Fu, please go ahead. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, time has quickly gone by. Almost all the sessions went over time. This really shows that there's so much to discuss. I was the moderator for the first session, and today I have the honor of being the moderator for the last session. Cultural heritage is a dynamic process. I became involved in cultural heritage preservation in the 80s, and I have seen a lot of changes happening over the years. People's mindsets have changed. People's perspectives and the practitioners, the participants of all these preservation efforts have all changed over time. And I think today we're more focused on sustainability and building and enhancing resilience. Over the past 2 days, I have heard a number of keywords that really came up repetitively. I would say these keywords were mentioned by almost all these speakers. The first keyword is resilience, followed by innovation, future, stakeholders, community. Being resilient, being adaptable, engaging the local communities, focusing on youth participation. I think they have pointed out a very clear path for our future development. These are the topics we need to invest more time and energy and resources to develop. I have been involved in the field for more than 40 years. However, I have continued to attend conferences like this whenever the opportunity presents itself. I never leave halfway. I've always sit in my seats and listen to each and every presentation because I'm open to new ideas. I'm open to be impacted, to be influenced, and learn new ideas. So with this humble attitude, I want to thank you all for your participation. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Fu. You've talked about resilience, innovation, and community engagement. These are all the different areas that we could definitely work on. Now I want to invite our Japanese speaker. He talked about in Japan, the evolution of the conventions and Japan's domestic regulations. So please, Professor Kono.
Thank you very much. But first of all, I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to the leadership of the Bureau of Cultural Heritage for organizing this very significant forum. I myself learned really a lot, and I was very impressed with amount of efforts of different stakeholders in Taiwan to preserve many kinds of cultural heritage. Well, I explained a little bit about the international law and the domestic law, but I also impressed with the scholarship of Taiwanese colleagues about Japanese law. They know much more than I do, and very thorough research has been done. So this is the basis of mutual learning. What is happening in Taiwan, many of them are not seen in Japan. So this would be an extremely good opportunity for us to learn what you have practiced so far, and you are practicing. And this said, well, Japan has a pretty solid legal system to preserve cultural heritage, but it faces also many issues. And in my view, one of the biggest issues is that Japan is a rapidly aging society. And who sustains, who pays all this cultural heritage? And this is the big questions for policymakers. And recently, the Japanese authority amended a law so that on a prefectural level, on a municipality level, more needs to be done. So this is actually the core message of this amendment. But on a municipality level, they have problem of lack of human resources, and although all municipalities are requested to make regional conservation plan, less than 20% of the municipalities have done that so far. So it means that on an operational level, there's lots of problems. So I think this is what, for instance, this is the one area that the Japanese, we do need to learn what is happening in other countries, how to do that on an operational level. And all these efforts must be also supported by the citizens. And this is not, we should not take it granted that all citizens understand the value and significance of cultural heritage. So we need a very proactive, promotional activities. So in this sense, that I would like to also appreciate that the citizens who have been attending this forum and your supports would be the very, very basis of the further activities of the heritage conservation. So this said, that again, thank you very much. It's a good opportunity for us to learn each other and then also what is happening in Taiwan. Thank you.
非常谢谢那个副教授。我想好，这个他分享了很多日本的。
Thank you, Professor Kono, for sharing the Japanese experience with us. I think citizen participation support plays a very important role in the sustainable development of cultural heritage. Regardless of which country you're in, we all face issues of similar nature. Now, Susan, the Vice President of ICOMOS, can you please say a few words?
I'd just like to obviously echo what Toshi has said, because my mind is completely blown by the diversity of your cultural heritage and the energy of the people protecting it. And my mind has been equally exhausted and stimulated since I hit land in Taipei. And I just want to say, for Deputy Minister and for Chi Ming, what an exciting job you've got with this team of people that we've just heard from. So I think I've got 7 little messages, and this is a bit of an insight into the state of my mind. It's all scribble, but I think one of the things I'm blown away by are the similar issues that we all face, and yet the different approaches that we take, and how that makes these sort of forums, as Toshi said, really, really important to be able to share those things so that we we can actually learn about these things that we sometimes think we know it all. And I've got sort of 7 messages I'm taking home with me. One, we need to build change and diversity into our systems to include the heritage of local people and communities. And this needs to be cross-generational. So we need to be listening to youth, but not at the expense of the knowledge of the elders. And we need to look at opportunities to bring them together. And we saw some examples of that yesterday. So the second point is concepts of heritage grow and change constantly. And we sort of know this intellectually, but it's really been interesting to hear how in people's lifetimes the concept of heritage has grown and changed, and how we all as practitioners and as legislators and administrators have had to address that. And that leads to my, whatever point I'm up to, which is that therefore our toolkit that we use to manage these things, to conserve them, to interpret them, needs to also change over time and be augmented with new tools added, old tools sharpened up, and that sort of thing. The role of governments is really, really, really important. And the role of a government that can encourage reflection and self-critical review, I think that's a strong government. When you have a government agency that's going to take protection seriously, leadership in heritage seriously, and be strategic, I think that's really important. And I think there's been times, you know, in my own country where we've been very critical of our government going through periods of time when it's lost that vision, because there are other times when it's been very strong in that area. And I think as people who pay for their government officials, we should be very active in expecting our governments to take that strong leadership role. And I think, you know, it's evident that it's here today. I also think we need to, we saw that we need to constantly look at heritage at different scales. So we need to take the big view, the cultural landscape view, and that certainly was evident today in the military heritage stuff. And we learnt those lessons also from Elizabeth's talk yesterday, that looking at the individual gunning tower or the individual, you know, anti-tank thing is not going to do it. It's not going to give people a really understanding of what that landscape is. And it's the same for other things like the Alishan Railway and the experience we had on there. It's very much a landscape approach, but we can't take our eyes off the individual monuments either, which are the important elements of that landscape. And I think because of that, we need guidelines and methodologies. The laws, the conventions, they're not enough. They're there, they're the sort of like hard tool, and then we need this thing that expounds and expands our understandings, that helps our practitioners, that hopefully can be translated into plain, I was going to say plain English, but plain Taiwanese or plain whatever, so that the local person understands it, where we take out some of the jargon and we give a clear guidelines for people so that they can, you know, take the responsibility of managing their own heritage. And also, the other thing I think then is that issue of difficult heritage, and we saw some of that today. We saw some of it yesterday in some of the projects like the prison and the defence communities. So I think it's really, that is a growing issue, I think, for the world, that truth-telling of not only turning something into a place that people will visit, or a place that people can use for other things like hotels or amenities, but to make sure we've got truth-telling in there. And I think Mario reminded us that in his comments. And sometimes those truths are very uncomfortable for communities, individuals and or governments. And it's not only defence, it's not only war, it's not only persecution or prison, it's things like colonialism in Australia, you know, is a really big issue. All of those things. So I think that's really, really important. And I think for Taiwan, I guess it's a really big issue to get those messages out there, because you're constantly in that really, you know, awkward political position of perhaps needing your truth to be told and heard and cemented down before it's changed by anyone else who might come in. Yes, I think that's it. I think I've done all my points. But I just, I've really, really enjoyed this, and I really thank you for the opportunity.
We'd like to thank Susan for this very summarized conclusion. And all of us, we have all learned a lot. You talked about the role, the leadership of the government. Director General Chen, he said he has said a lot, so he's not going to make any comments. He's just going to listen, and he's going to incorporate these comments and voices into future policies. We are also handling a lot of legal amendments, revisions. So these 2 days, we have received a lot of these insights from different agencies across different disciplines and also from Taiwan and abroad. We've talked a lot about cases, about the role of the younger generation. So for the Ministry of Culture, we want to continue to dialogue with the international community and also to better use many of these cases. I've talked with Professor Fu. There's still a lack of these guidelines. So these are directions for future efforts. And once again, on behalf of the Ministry of Culture, we'd like to once again welcome all of our friends from ICOMOS and also for all of the participants. We will continue to pour in more efforts as a member of the international community. We will continue to dedicate ourselves, to dedicate our resources in becoming a more responsible global citizen. We want to continue to advance our practices in preserving our cultural heritage and that we can really ensure sustainability in the trends of globalization. And once again, I would like to thank you all.
But we're not done with group photos. So would you please stand up? Yes. 我们请台上的5位贵宾，次长、局长，我们3位贵宾在台中间一起合照。那这一张合照完之后呢，请大家留步一下。这张合完照之后呢，想要请各位贵宾一起到前面来合照好吗？所以我们拍2张，第一张先台上的5位贵宾，第2张呢就邀请大家一同到台上或者是台前一起来合照哦。We'll do 2 photos. The first one for 5 people on the stage, and the second one, everybody's invited, okay? For the second one, please join us on the stage or in front of the stage. Thank you. And thank you so much for your participation for the 2024 International Forum on Taiwan Cultural Heritage. 好，我们先请台上的5位贵宾一起合照一下。Okay, now for the second photo, everybody please come join us on the stage or in front of the stage. Mario, Elizabeth, Monica, 曾老师、严老师，我们所有的贵宾，所有的讲师，所有的与会的朋友们，我们大家都到台上来哦。Professor Cho, please also join us on the stage. Okay. We're all cultural heritage people. Please join us on the stage or in front of the stage. And thank you again for your participation. And we look forward to seeing you again very soon in the future. 好，各位朋友们，我们大家都到台上来或台前一起合照好吗？那我们这一次呢，2024台湾文化遗产国际论坛要再次谢谢有这么多，除了国内外的专家学者之外呢，当然还有我们现场许多文化资产、文化遗产保存的所有的这个先进一起来参与。Okay, the last one. Everybody be happy, okay? Show us your smile. Yes. All right. Thank you again. Thank you very much. Thank you and bye-bye. We look forward to seeing you again very soon. 那有借口译设备的贵宾提醒大家要记得归还口译设备。那同时呢，我们场外也备有餐盒，请各位贵宾呢在离场的时候呢。不要忘记了，谢谢。Yes, please return the headsets for us, and thank you again. Have a good day, everybody.